Though it's a time of peace, and we've covered the administrative and legal developments, the priorities and advancements under Aegon the Conqueror, not to mention his wars, the conquest, arguably this is the biggest expansion of the story yet in Fire and Blood, because now we focus on characters. We started to tease it more the last few times as Aenys and Alyssa and their children and Maegor come up and grow up. And Visenya is no longer just her brother's watchful eye and right-hand woman. She takes a far more active role in determining the future of House Targaryen. Not just Westeros, but House Targaryen. Of course, the two are overlap, but this is more of a focus on their internal house rather than the realm at large. In other words, we've seen how they rule the realm. How do they rule their own family, though? How does that manage? How do they rule themselves? And that's a big part of what makes this episode unique. We get to see the first royal House of the Dragon come into being. This is how it starts. Lots of matches, marriages, children, and grandchildren, and a few changes to their living arrangements. The House of the Dragon becomes the home of the dragon. And funny how when you talk about family, normally, or at least when you're discussing family in other contexts, it's often something wholesome. Time with loved ones, people you can trust and count on. I mean, that's not true for every family. Particularly not true for noble families and royal families. Definitely not the very first House of the Dragon. It's definitely not an exception. In fact, it's a great example of the opposite of a positive, nurturing environment. They might teach you how to lead. They might teach you how to rule. But managing yourself, getting along with other people, that's not as much of a focus. So this episode features new threats, new Targaryens. Some who are both new Targaryens and new threats, not to mention more actual dragons, and a few open questions that might rise to the level of mystery. All that and more on this episode of History of Westeros podcast. Hello and welcome back, everybody, my fellow Westorians. We are here once again. This episode is being recorded at 3 Eastern on YouTube, which is when we do most of our live streams. The exception is when there's a TV season on and the occasional other thing. But yeah, Sundays at 3, that's our home or our house, since that's the theme today. And we do record in our house, and Sean records in his. So, hey, we got a whole house home thing going on here. After the live stream, you can eventually find the video on Spotify about a week later in edited form, and the podcast version is anywhere you find podcasts in edited form as well. And it's ad-free if you listen on Patreon. That's right. Cut out several minutes of ads if you subscribe voluntarily. And you also get bonus episodes. So not only do you cut out the ads, but you add bonus episodes. It's ads gone, bonus episodes in their place. That's a pretty good deal. Another thing we have going over on our Patreon is the Topics Moot. It's been running all month. It's getting closer to the end, but as of this recording, it's still going on. And in the mid-roll, we'll talk about some fun things going on with that, because there's been some fun developments and some topics chosen. Sean, what are you drinking today? And what is that on your shirt?
This is it's reminiscent of Dunk at Arlen's grave by the oak tree, I think. But that's not what it is. This is from The Last Airbender, Avatar: The Last Airbender. There's a couple. Uncle Iroh goes to visit his son's grave at a tree, and it reminds me a little bit of just the nature of the father-son dynamics that show included, and how maybe if the parents had been better, the children would have been better.
Yeah. Isn't that always the case? What about your beverage?
Well, this is a little different than normal. I've been drinking the Naked Green Machine pretty consistently with the Magic Mind mixed in it. And this time I have there's a new sparkling ice flavor, just straight strawberry, Starburst strawberry.
Oh,
so I've got that in the mix too.
Right on. That's cool. Shay, what shirt do you have on there?
I'm wearing one. I wear a lot just because it's kind of comfy. It's a long sleeve sweatshirt with Sailor Moon on the Iron Throne. Hey. But the Iron Throne is made all out of like magical girl weaponry cool. Instead of just swords. Like, yeah, it's got like Cardcaptor and Sailor Moon. Anyway, it's really cute, and it's got Luna, her little cat, on it with her, and it's one of my favorites shirts.
Nice. I've got a little Westeros shirt on from the TV show era, original TV show era, and I thought it was appropriate because we were discussing the ongoing formation of a new Westeros, so I thought it was appropriate. Also, I have a lot of Game of Thrones shirts, but we've done a lot of episodes, and
Yeah.
I have to wear them twice every one, or 3 or 4. I can't just have one for every episode. That would be
Yeah,
too
you
much.
have to outfit repeat sometimes as much as, yeah. Aziz has a pretty preposterously large t-shirt wardrobe, though, because of this.
Yeah. But
As
it's
do I.
still not enough to do one individual per episode.
Yeah, think about that. If we have like 400 episodes,
Yeah.
that would be 400 t-shirts.
Yeah, I
if you
definitely
never
don't have that
repeated.
many
Yeah,
t-shirts.
you
That's
have
way
like
too
100
many.
though.
I probably do. I might even have 150, but nowhere, definitely not 200. And nowhere near 400. Yep. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to make a quick note talking about house and home
Yeah.
earlier. It just reminded me of a thought, a quote that has stuck with me. I'm pretty sure it's from The Death of a Salesman. Home is where, when you have to go, they have to take you. A neat thought. Almost every angle you
That's
come at that, I
neat.
think
Okay.
it's pretty true. Yeah.
Well, this is the kind of situation when you're talking about royalty where that's never the case. They've got too much money to be forced to take you. Well, they just give you another castle. Like, well, no, if we want to let you live, we can just stick you over here.
Well,
And
that means that's not really your home.
I guess not. And that is one of the problems we'll be discussing, is that Aenys and Maegor didn't really spend a lot of time together. To them, it wasn't really a home. It was a house and not a home for them. Shout out to our good friend Nina, aka Good Queen Alley. goodqueenalley.tumblr.com is where you can find her writings. The latest blog post is regarding a question she got about House Ironwood's support for the Blackfires. What might the Blackfires have offered House Ironwood to bring them over, or what did the Ironwoods see as a benefit to siding with the Blackfires? And it's a very interesting answer. It involves some of what we're talking with today. In fact, some of the eventual unification of Dorne with Westeros is included, and how that might have been a wedge to use in this scenario where some people some people didn't want to become a part of the Seven Kingdoms, and that might be who the Ironwoods court for their side. And it's a pretty good take and a pretty good question.
I'm going to give a personal shout out to Nina also. My sister has arranged a trip to Disney World for my family for my niece's 4th birthday. And I asked Nina, and I was like, hey, what can you tell me about Disney World? And I think she knows more about Disney World than A Song of Ice and Fire. She only
which is really saying
30
something.
paragraphs of
Yeah.
information, and said that was the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, she is very knowledgeable. That is for darn sure. About both. Yes, about both.
And much more.
And much more. But those two things are near in her top 5, probably. So I will mention some episodes at the end that relate to this one. Of course, we often talk about things that relate to other episodes we've done in the past, and that's always a fun way to stay immersed if that's your flavor of the day or the week. And if you have any questions for us, you can put them in the chat if you're watching live, or send them to westeroshistory@gmail.com as a good default way to send questions. We've been getting some from y'all lately, enough so that we might have to do another mailbag episode one of these days. So if you want a mailbag episode to happen, by all means, send us more questions. That'll make it happen sooner.
What about female bag?
I don't put women in bags. I only put men in bags.
Oh, okay.
And the trivia question. Let's get started with that. Also, the answer at the end, along with the episode recommendations. Which one of Aegon's grandchildren? Now, grandchildren only, not great-grandchildren, or great-grandchildren, or great-great-grandchildren, or great-great... No, I'll stop there. Never rode a dragon. Which one of Aegon's grandchildren never rode a dragon? Only one of them, but... Yep. And again, as usual, the answer will be in this episode. So,
Also, at the end, we'll name off some patron names, too.
That's right. We do like to do
part
that.
Of our format.
Good, fun stuff. That's true. Good shout-outs there. Last time we took a look at policy, law, and gradual changes to the realm on a macro level. We jumped around in the timeline because much of what we had to discuss played out up to several decades. This time we have a better idea of the years and the order of events, so we'll be letting several narratives play out at once as we move through the founding of the House of the Dragon. We'll go year by year. Their expansion, the proliferation of actual dragons and Targaryens that came along with that, and the death of their founding patriarch, the Conqueror, That will happen at the end of this episode. It's in this episode as well that people would start to look at him and see Aegon the First, meaning that one after his name, because, well, he had a grandson born during this part of the timeline named Aegon, and this prince was in the direct line of succession, and many other grandchildren came before and after. Well, one came before, and several more came after. But in total, several came. Little could Aegon the First know that Prince Aegon, his grandchild, would never be crowned, and not because of some tragedy that befell him, although you could argue it was a tragedy, but really it was Maegor that befell him on his own dragon, Balerion. I don't think Aegon would have been pleased to find that out from beyond the grave, but he was beyond the grave when that happened, so yes, this will come many years later, but we can absolutely trace the events of this era to the events of that era. A lot of those dots are pretty easy to connect. A few others, not so much, though, so that'll be something for us to delve into. Today, we'll be talking about Aegon and Visenya, Lord Ethan Velaryon, Sir Osmond Strong, the Hand of the King, Princes Aenys and Maegor, Alyssa Velaryon, the eventual queen, Princess Rhaena and Princess Alysanne, Princess Aegon, Viserys and Jaehaerys, Cerise Hightower, Pirate King Sargasso-san, lots of names there. Now, that's a lot of princes and princesses, more than one king, thanks to Sargasso. Only one current queen, but several future queens. Yeah, lots of future queens. Cerise, Alysanne, Alyssa. It's a lot of queens. And 2 hands as well. But there's a lot of actual dragons born this era too. And I mean actual dragons, not these Targaryens. And of course, more as well. A great era of growth for both the House of the Dragon and the dragons in the house. One of the reasons why this larger cast makes the story a bit more fun is because there's so many more perspectives to consider, so many interactions between so many important people, and, well, we have the characters who forged this new world and those who were born into it.
That's enough queens, by the way, for a musical.
That's true. That's true. You could go a bit higher. You know, I feel like you get up to about 6, you know, and that's about where you want to stop. The year 19 AC, I believe, is where we can start to go year by year for a while and be able to stay on that chronology without having to jump around. So, a house for the House of the Dragon is our first section. A royal city gave Aegon manpower and wealth to draw upon if his kingdom was ever threatened by one of the other great houses or from outside the kingdom. Of course, I'm speaking of King's Landing. And he could likely see how it would give even more wealth and manpower to his descendants, given how rapidly it became a city in the first place, and how that growth just continued for decades and decades, which I think was predictable. Quote,
Unlike its rivals, however, King's Landing had no walls. It needed none, some of its residents were known to say. No enemy would ever dare attack the city so long as it was defended by the Targaryens and their dragons. The king himself might have shared these views originally, but the death of his sister Rhaenys and her dragon Meraxes in 10 AC and the attacks upon his own person undoubtedly gave him cause. And in the 19th year after the conquest, word reached Westeros of a daring raid in the Summer Isles, where a pirate fleet had sacked Tall Tree's town and carried off 1,000 women and children as slaves, along with a fortune in plunder. The accounts of the raid greatly troubled the king, who realized that King's Landing would be similarly vulnerable to any enemy shrewd enough to fall upon the city when he and Visenya were elsewhere. Can I say, when the line undoubtedly gave him cause threw me really bad because I was like, pause? It could have been gave him pause when it was cause, and then the whole rest of the quote, I was just like, was that a typo in the book?
Dragons don't have pause. So he really, really couldn't have something like that Tall Trees raid happening. Now, Tall Trees town is old. It's been around a long time. It is what it is. It was obviously a massive tragedy what happened to them, but it doesn't really change what that city is. It doesn't change its history. It doesn't establish it as something different. This is a new city, King's Landing. If word gets out that this new capital is vulnerable, then there's going to be more attacks. So it isn't just about saving his people from an attack. It's saving them from a pattern. He doesn't want that to be how his city is viewed as a target. He doesn't want it to look like a place where people can come. In fact, he wants it to be the opposite. He might like someone to come, lose, and then that's the message that everybody gets. Kind of like what happened to them in Dorne.
Yeah. It's also sort of symbolic. He doesn't want that to be its legacy either.
Right. And it doesn't have a legacy because it's so new. So that would be
right.
A new city is in search of a legacy when it's establishing that. And this would be part of that. This weakness, when it was new, it was sacked, and it's been that ever since then, blah, blah, blah. You know, that could be how it's described. Aegon doesn't want that.
And not just a new city, a new capital of a new realm.
Yeah.
Right?
The
it's
new
layers
capital.
and layers of symbolism here, making it important for Aegon to not let something negative happen.
Yeah, that would be really bad for his reputation as a king, for his dynasty getting started, for his new realm. Yeah, just a number of really bad things. And he realized that he kind of left himself open for it by not setting up some defenses sooner. So he did make the effort to address that shortcoming. And all this growth was surely something to be encouraged, as difficult as it was to manage and as hard as it probably was to keep track of and growing out of control that it was. This would have been a much bigger problem. You know, that's a good problem to have as a ruler. I've got too many people coming to join my new city. Oh, woe is me. But if they're all carried off into slavery to another continent, yeah, that is a real problem. I mean, that's not even talking about the individual lives and the horrors they would have to face. This is just Aegon thinking about his kingdom. He's not thinking about individuals and their suffering, though that is certainly relevant. I'm just a bit cynical in thinking that he probably doesn't care about that too much. There had never been a large-scale settlement at this spot before, you know, King's Landing, the area. There'd never been a united Westerosi kingdom. Of course, we've said that before, but it's important to point that out as a perspective to the rest of the world. The rest of the world has never seen Westeros united. The rest of the world has never seen it under one rule. Of course, it's not quite under one rule. There's Beyond the Wall and Beyond the Red Mountains. But, you know, you get the point. It's a very new situation. So the rumors would spread far and wide. The reputation of King's Landing and, say, Asshai is almost non-existent at this point. You know, it's only been around for 20 years. And it takes, 2 years to do a voyage back and forth to Asshai? So, yeah, there's not a lot to say yet. Some people in Asshai probably haven't even heard of King's Landing by this point, which is really saying a lot. But it's also goes to the point that 20 years for a city is nothing. That's the infancy of a city. And there is as well the possibility of, you know, like it says in the book, Aegon, the times that Aegon was attacked, where he was almost assassinated. You know, if he had been killed at this point, what would happen? I mean, his heir is too young. Visenya is maybe a bit of a hardliner. Having her in full charge might not work out great. She's a little maybe too tough and not good enough at using soft power. So who knows? Yeah, and lots of things could have gone wrong had King's Landing been sacked.
I can imagine even thinking about some of the conflicts that had happened in his conquest, like that wedding that got raided by the Dornish.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like something like that happening in King's Landing. If it's not like an all-out, you know, assault or something like that, something like that would still be a bad mark. And I'm sure in considering or realizing this, or maybe someone else like a maester might have brought this to his attention.
Yeah.
Right. And I can imagine there would have been infinite examples they would have brought to him, right? Of like what you need to be afraid of.
Yeah.
It might not have been hard to convince him, but if he was reluctant at all, they could have just one after another talked about different cities being sacked and the impacts of it and so on. He was like, okay, we'll build some walls, you know?
Yeah. So walls he did build, and this is of course familiar to us because the King's Landing that we have seen in A Song of Ice and Fire, during the Dance of the Dragons, the Dunk and Egg, all that, it always has had walls from all the times we've seen it. So it becomes the more familiar version of itself, the one that we know. 7 gates, each with a named road, although those road names probably didn't happen right away. Those walls are really high. As far as we know, they've never had to be added onto a rebuild, so they did it right the first time, which is, you know, good on them. And remember that King's Road is new. Jaehaerys did a big road building project. So these roads, when we say there's roads out of the 7 gates, these are still dirt roads. Maybe they might be well-worn paths, so like well traveled, but they're definitely not made of stone. They're still going to be susceptible to mud and things like that. So that would be a later development. Now remember, King's Landing is on 3 hills. There's Aegon's High Hill, the Hill of Rhaenys, Hill of Visenya, and the walls as a whole. I almost said walls as a whore. I did say walls as a whore. I didn't almost say it. I did say that by accident. And it's almost a square, even though it's such a big thing and so sprawling. The way the walls are built, it is basically that. One side faces the Blackwater Rush, which is the river. Another side faces Blackwater Bay. One side faces inland, going southwest along the Blackwater Rush, and the other side faces northwest, pointing towards the Riverlands and the north and all that. So we can imagine when the walls were built, there was a lot of space. Because, like we said, we don't know of any rebuilding project or the walls being expanded on or anything like that. So they had to have left room for King's Landing to grow into the size it is now. Because obviously, if they had built the walls just surrounding what was there at the time, they would have been, oops, we need to expand and do that again. And here's a little map that Ashea put up there. You can see how it's basically a square. It's got a bulge there on the coast, but pretty much a square. One day we'll do a full episode on King's Landing. We had all these notes on King's Landing last time. In fact, a lot more than we're going through today. And I realized, a King's Landing episode is more than appropriate. We've done episodes on Highgarden and Old Town, so of course King's Landing is appropriate. Even though it's got a much shorter history than those places, it's got a very rich, full history. And yeah, it's... Go ahead, Sean.
New York has a shorter history than London or Paris, but it's not like there's not a lot to talk about in New York.
Great point. Yeah, New York is relatively young comparatively. That's a great point. It's like 100 years younger than King's Landing even. And the Aegon Fort's also going to be torn down a little later. We'll talk about that, but it's another part of expanding their house, making it more of a home and making it more appropriate. So a lot of King's Landing at this stuff was kind of mobile and changeable because it wasn't planned this way in the first place. So people just put things in places. And yeah, I think that's kind of a recurring theme, though, with the Targaryens. Some Targaryens are just bad rulers and they make all sorts of bad decisions. But even the ones who make good decisions as rulers often make bad decisions as parents, right? Viserys on House of the Dragon is our primary example. He may not be the best example, but he's so prominent because he was on TV. Robert Baratheon, similar example. Tywin's not a good parent. There's all these bad parents. Now, those aren't Targaryens, but it's still a recurring theme of people who rule effectively, not necessarily well, but effectively are good. Tywin, it's debatable. There's a lot of things he didn't do well, but he was still better than a lot of other rulers because the bar is low. But if you're a bad parent of people who are going to be rulers later, you undermine all that, right? You ruled well as yourself, but you just foisted a bad ruler on the realm after your death for maybe a period that's longer than your period of rule. So Tywin rules decently for 20 years and then foists his family on the realm, and Cersei and Jaime and Joffrey, and they all do all this stuff. Like, doesn't that take away from his credit, even though he didn't do it? Because he made those people. He taught those people, he educated them, he raised them, or didn't
or failed to,
right?
Yeah.
Which is in itself a failure. So, and I think Aegon's more of that. Aegon isn't a actively bad father. He may not even be a bad father, but I think what we'll see here going forward is he was more interested in things like this about King's Landing than he was in managing the people who will rule King's Landing after him.
I don't know. We could talk about this infinitely, and we're trying to. But just thinking about, Aegon, I want to try to justify some of his failures as a parent because he's ruling this new kingdom, which has all sorts of new challenges. Like, even to whatever extent Tywin was ruling it, there was some established precedent and infrastructure and points of contact and everything else in place for him to work with, But yeah. Aegon had established all that in the first place. So, I can maybe see Aegon being, quote unquote, justifiably busy with other things, not being able to manage his kids. But Tywin, I guess, was too busy committing genocide against the Castamere. It's like, what's his excuse,
Yeah, right. So
just one more thing I want to just say, that as a reminder, for me, this is read us, not reread us.
Yeah,
right. So
right.
it's a lot that I'm taking in and processing and trying to like remember all the names and dates and stuff, much less drawing conclusions. But it is something I've been stewing over a lot. Is that this point that you're making? It's sort of this recurring thing of decent, at least ostensibly decent rulers failing with their kids, which then that next generation, it's hard to say,
Yeah.
but maybe if they had done worse as rulers and good with their kids, then maybe we'd be talking about how it's a recurrent theme if they leave their kids with all these problems. Yeah, I'm not sure how much of it would have been different or how much is to blame them, but one way or the other, I'm thinking so much about this consistent pattern. I wonder what Martin's trying to reflect here.
Well,
or if it's intentional, if it's just natural history or what.
I agree with you in theory that it's difficult maybe to do both, but I think that's one thing that George is teaching us is that there's very few people that are good at both of these things. These are very different skill sets. I think ruling a realm and ruling a family, or providing for a family, or leading a family, or being a father are just extremely different things. There's no reason why being good at one would make you good at the other. It's like why the old Mitch Hedberg joke, like, oh, you're a chef, so you're good at farming? No, of course not. Yeah. Yes, they're food related, but they're completely different skill sets. They have nothing to do. One is about being more patient, and waiting, and nurturing. That's farming. And another is, being a chef is you're actively making use of these ingredients and turning it into something entirely new. It's a very different thing. Like, it's food related, but they're completely different ways that the food is handled. And one is growing it, one is turning it into edible presentations. It's so different.
The timetable that you're on, the tools that you use, so on and so on.
Yeah, I'm really just explaining obvious things here, but it's a good example, I think, of how, it's raising eggs versus cooking eggs. And I like eggs as an example because there's Aegons instead of eggs and dragon eggs. It all fits very well, yes.
One thing that they both take is time, and there's only so many hours in a day. Even if you sacrifice sleep or hobbies or whatever else, it's hard to just have enough hours to raise kids and manage kingdoms. So.
Well, one thing that gets me, though, I agree with what you're saying in theory. One thing that gets me, though, and we'll go through examples of this throughout the episode, is that Aegon will go against his own teachings in accomplishing these, or rather in making these failures. For example, he made a big point: send your children to me so that I can have them all get along together. Yet he didn't do that with his own children. His own children were not raised together. And so he's just putting the wedge he's trying to not have between other houses. He's creating it in his own house. So that's, to me, kind of blatant. Now, maybe some of these other ones, there's nuance. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. This next section is called Filling the House of the Dragon with Dragons. Let's have a quote.
Prince Aenys was the heir apparent, and King Aegon kept him close by his side. As the king moved about the realm from castle to castle, so did the prince. Prince Maegor remained with his mother, sitting by her side when she held court. Queen Visenya and King Aegon were oft apart in those years. When he was not on a royal progress, Aegon would return to King's Landing and the Aegon Fort, whilst Visenya and her son remained on Dragonstone.
So Aenys learned how to hold court from his father, where Maegor learned how to hold court from his mother. And we know Visenya is a lot more hardcore, a lot less forgiving, more of a rule by fear type, so it's no surprise that's how Maegor turned out. And so we're in the year 20 now. We started on year 19. The Walls Project begins, and it's overseen by Hand of the King Osmond Strong. It kept on going and going. It took several years. The realm would have a lot of young men and women born after the conquest. Of course, the initial effect of the conquest would be a lowering of the population because all the people killed in war. But then you enter this, and then more killed in Dorne. But then you have this period where we have peace for quite a while, and peace between all the kingdoms, which means a boom of babies being born. Now, of course, we're still too early in the timeline for those people to be adults, but they're still mouths to feed. There's just lots of children being born, and that's going to matter. And of course, when we're talking about noble children, that's going to be true as well. You have the men of the household are out less fighting in war. They're at home with their wife. And that means babies are more likely to be made, especially when you're talking about an entire population and not just a couple of houses. We're looking at macro numbers here. And that was true for the Targaryens, too. Instead of Aegon, conquering and his wives being out on their dragons burning castles, they're at home. Well, Rhaenys isn't anymore, but still, his kids will be as well. So they're basically a population boom all over the place. And I'd believe that the population boom began, if not during the First Dornish War, because as many people as were killed down there, we're still talking about an entire nation, and 40,000 warriors going into Dorne isn't that big of a number when, especially since not all of them were killed. Just more than half. When we're talking about the entire continent, right? It's a lot of people, but it's not that big a number when we're talking about the entirety of Westeros' population. So macro numbers are difficult to pin down here, but we can still imagine certain trends. Aenys would have been flying by now, which is neat to think about. He'd be the first new dragon rider since well before the conquest. Think about that. It might have been over 3 decades before a new dragon had been claimed in Westeros. Like from the time, I don't know we don't know whether it was probably Rhaenys was probably the last person to claim a dragon before Aenys claiming Meraxes. But it could have been Visenya claiming Vhagar or Aegon claiming Balerion. Those might have happened later. We don't know who claimed a dragon first. But all 3 of them happened well before the conquest. And now here we are, in the year 20, and yeah, pretty neat. Meanwhile, Maegor does not have a dragon, of course, but he does have, he's already a squire at age 8, as we said last time, and his master at arms, as we also said, one of the deadliest knights in the realm, Sir Gawain Corbray, so he's learning how to fight from one of the best. Now, we know he's eventually going to claim Balerion, so I want to start thinking about that now, because was he waiting for that? Was that his intent all along? But was it his intent? Did he 6, 7, 8-year-old Maegor have this plan, or was it his mother's idea? That seems more likely. The adult having that idea is a little more likely than the 8-year-old, but it is possible Maegor had it himself. I mean, the idea is pretty straightforward. Don't claim a hatchling. Claim a big one, or the biggest one. Or, yeah, because it might have just been, hey, wait for a bigger one, but it might have been wait for that one. Right? What do you think about that, Sean?
I think it would have been the mother's influence. I mean, not that he couldn't have thought of it as an 8-year-old, but things 8-year-olds think of aren't really well thought out.
Yeah. Even a squire at 8,
whatever.
Still, yeah.
So, and it makes more sense to me at age 8. He would have just wanted any dragon he could get. I think it's more likely that his mom was like, "Be patient, wait for this certain dragon," or probably that certain dragon. It does still seem. I will say, it does still seem like a bit of a risk for her to take, but maybe she knows she has to be patient already since he's already just a second-born son.
Mm-hmm.
There's all these other factors in play.
That's a good point. A lot of great takes from Nina here on this subject. Everything about Maegor is about being a warrior. He loved battle. He loved showing his strength. He loved dominating people. He was good at it, right? And so it does kind of make sense that he would want to choose the biggest weapon of war. He wants to choose something that's dominating and something that enables him to express that part of himself, the dominant side, the violent side, the one that intimidates people. And what's more intimidating than Balerion? He saw his own father on that dragon and was like, yeah, that's for me. So maybe his mom gave him the idea, but I would imagine he seized on it. Like, yeah, that is a good idea. I want that. Now, the idea might have been, yeah, wait for a bigger dragon, not necessarily that one. Because what if Visenya died first? Would he have still waited for Balerion, or would he have just taken Vhagar, who's, the second biggest? I don't know. That's a tough call, and we will never know that one. But we're reminded of Aemond One-Eye, who, pink dread aside, in the book, he says, I don't want some puny hatchling or some stupid egg. That's a direct quote from much later in Fire and Blood. He wants the biggest. So maybe Aemond channeling Maegor a bit here. And Aemond does have some things in common with Maegor, other than... now, let's not forget, book Aemond was small. Show Aemond is actually a bit big. Not like muscular, but tall. And that's a difference. And of course, neither are anywhere the size of Maegor, who's huge.
I think Maegor would have taken Vhagar, by the way, especially once Aenys already has a dragon. I think he or Visenya would have been happy for him to take Vhagar.
Yeah, it's possible, for sure. And Valerian was his father's dragon too, so that's another thing. It's like, well, I'm the second born, I've been left out, and Aenys gets all the attention. Maybe that's a way to, he'd never admit to it, being such a macho warrior type, but that might be a way to like emulate his father or be more like his dad. And yeah, and if we're imagining that it was Visenya's idea, it isn't straightforward that, oh, she wanted her son to be the biggest and strongest. It could be that simple. But I think that's just part of it. Now, did she perceive Aenys as too weak and thought her son should be the king? Or did she perceive Aenys as too weak and thought her son would be very helpful? It was like, oh, he's going to need Maegor. And this could change. Over time, she might be like, okay, no, I want Maegor to be king. But at first, I wouldn't quite go that far, though I'm open to it. You know, Visenya, I think she wanted her house to be strong. I don't know that she had to have her son on the throne. Maybe at some point her mind changed on that. But I kind of doubt it began that way. But it might have. It might have. Definitely might have. And so, yeah, I think it's a very strong chance that she wanted Balerion for her son. And it may have been because she expected him to be king in the long run, or it may have just been because she wanted him to be as powerful as possible, which might have been.
No, there's another potential. She might have seen some of the red flags and wanted to put off him getting a dragon as long as possible.
Okay.
Right? Like
maybe, yeah.
Maybe you need to mature first. Maybe you need to sure you can handle a dragon. Maybe we need some other people with dragons to keep you in check. Maybe that's cynical of me or optimistic of me, of her, to have him be patient.
And she will later suggest betrothing Maegor to Aenys' first child, which is like, well, that's not the mark of someone who wants to overthrow Aenys. That's just someone who wants her son to come next. Which is, and you know, honestly, that wasn't the worst idea ever. It wasn't accepted, but anyway, it's about to happen now. So, Aenys and Alyssa get married in the year 22. Alyssa was daughter to Lord Ethan Velaryon and Lady Alara Massey. Now, remember, Ethan was the son of Daemon Velaryon, the same Daemon that died trying to take Gulltown during the conquest. He'd been master of ships ever since, Ethan has been. So 20 plus years at this point. So he's a big man around campus, or big man around court. Well accustomed to the Targaryens, been in their service for a long time. Obviously has Valyrian heritage shared with them. His brother, Lord Corlys, not to be confused with the Sea Snake, who won't be born for several decades still. Corlys was the first ever Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, so he's uncle to the future queen. Although it's actually possible Corlys is dead by this time. We don't know when he died. He might live for another 20 years. He might already have been dead by this time. Unfortunately, we don't have any more info than that. So this is not an incest marriage in the eyes of the faith, right? It's a Velaryon and a Targaryen. So they got around the problem this time, but as we said last time, they had to know it was going to be a problem eventually, you know, because they would have married a daughter if they had had one. And Aegon himself and Visenya and Rhaenys were also the children of a Velaryon. So, right, their mother was Valyna Velaryon and their dad was Lord Aerion. So either way, Alyssa looked Valyrian, silvery blonde hair, purple eyes. Now, Alara, here's a little change. Alyssa was said to be Targaryen on her mother's side in the world of Ice and Fire, but then in Fire and Blood it's changed to Alara Massey. So, who is not Targaryen, clearly, but she might have Targaryen in her heritage, so it might have been less of a change than it sounds like. Anyway, that's a small thing, but fun little trivia there for you. Hey, I could have made that the trivia today, but I didn't. Either way, they were linked by blood, because Aenys' paternal grandmother was Valyna Velaryon, and they're all, you know, all those Velaryons would be connected to her somehow. So the purpose may have been the same as usual. Keep the blood of the dragon pure. Now, acknowledging we don't know exactly what that means. We have our theories on what the blood of the dragon pure means. But to the rest of the realm, it probably just looked like they weren't willing to marry into the realm they ruled over. They were keeping it close-knit. They were keeping it Valyrian, which, that's not ideal. Especially because they're trying to adopt a lot of stuff about the Seven Kingdoms. They're adopting the faith. They're doing all these like house words and sigils and all these other things. It's still an understandable match from the Targaryen side of things because, well, it's not an incestuous marriage. To them, it seems like a compromise, probably. You know, even though to some members of the faith, they're like, no, we're not compromising over incest. Like, that's not something you compromise over. It's like either you do it or you don't. So was he trying to maybe gradually shift things, like slowly break the realm into these issues that he knew would be a problem, or was he just kind of expecting them to accept it because he's in charge and his family will be in charge after him? Yeah, it's not clear. And there's no evidence that they ever married into a non-Valyrian house prior to Aegon either. We don't know who his father's father and who Visenya and Rhaenys' grandparents married and all that. We do hear that there was a marriage between Gaemon the Glorious and a younger daughter. So there probably is actually some evidence. I'm probably wrong about that. There probably is at least a little evidence that there was marriages to the 7 kingdoms from the Targaryens, but not a lot of it. But it's even that one's not positive because it might have been a Velaryon or Celtigar or someone else of Valyrian descent, but it's not sure. Anyway, Aenys and Alyssa were born in the same year, so they were very age appropriate. They had a lot in common. This may have helped their marriage quite a bit that they had so much in common, but maybe, sometimes people bring out the worst in each other, like you feed on each other's worst qualities, Some of these traits they had were not helpful as rulers. Like, they both apparently liked to be loved and praised, which is not a great trait for a ruler. You need to be able to handle criticism and being wrong and things like that. However, there is some evidence that this isn't that accurate when it comes to Alyssa. Like, Septon Barth is the one that says she desired to be loved, admired, and praised. There isn't really any evidence for it. There is for Aenys. We don't have like times when this happened. And Septon Barth didn't really know Alyssa that well. He knew her later in life, but he didn't know her at this time. So it might be a way to make Jaehaerys look a little better by comparison. I'm not sure. Either way, neither of them were big on making unpopular decisions at first, though Alyssa's going to show that when things get dangerous, she can totally handle herself and is willing to do brave things and dangerous things, where Aenys, not so much.
Yeah, I was going to make the point that, wanting praise, like almost any trait, it's not automatically completely inherently bad. It can be bad if you do it too much, right? At the expense of other things.
Yeah.
It can be good because if you want praise, that means you're going to do things that people like, and that's a good thing for a leader, right? But
yeah,
you can't only do things that people like, or sometimes some people like A and some people like B, and you have to be able to decide between them. And there's like a correct decision that you might avoid because more people will like one than the other.
There's the popular choice and the right choice, and they're not always the same. Aenys, what I think is being suggested is Aenys would rather choose the popular choice than the one that maybe is better for the realm. And it's maybe Barth is suggesting that about Alyssa too, but that's the thing we're not so sure
and
about.
Also, Barth is the one deciding what's better for the realm. So if he thinks it's better for the realm, for the maesters and the church to get more money, but Aenys thinks it's better for the realm for the average person to get more money or be taxed less or whatever, there's still going to be a perspective of what's quote unquote better for the realm.
That's true.
Aenys may or may not have been making bad decisions. It's hard to say.
He might have been a better king at a different time. He was not a king to follow his father. I don't think, at least if we're being results oriented. And well, we don't have much else to go on other than the results here. So in the year 23 AC, moving forward one more year, Aegon and Aenys fly to Sunspear to celebrate 10 years of peace with Dorne. And let me tell you, I do not suspect this was the most loose, fun event of all time. You have Balerion and Quicksilver hanging out, so there's always the threat of dragons just right there. And the Dornish were probably wondering what kind of guy this Aenys was. They probably heard a bit about him. When they met him, they're probably like, okay, well, I'm not so worried about this guy. This guy doesn't seem like he's going to come at us like his father. So they probably felt some measure of optimism. And this is the only son of the queen who had been killed in Dorne. I mean, this is the son of Rhaenys. They killed Rhaenys in this country.
Clear, he would be about 16?
Yeah.
Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah. He
Just
was
to
born in the year 7.
Right? Like, this is like, he's right in the throes of like his majority becoming like, he's about to be an adult properly,
Yeah.
right? Like
Robb Stark was already leading armies at this
Yeah.
age. Yeah, like 16 is considered a man by royal standards, by Westerosi standards, and this is a crown prince, so he's been raised to be a leader.
I have a thought here, kind of going back to something from earlier too. The idea that Aenys was traveling around with Aegon for all these royal progresses.
Yeah.
One, that would have prepared him for this moment. However awkward this moment is, he was better prepared
He knew what to
than
say.
Maegor would have been, right?
Yeah,
Like
yes.
if he had just been sitting around in an ivory tower somewhere, he might not be as prepared for this sort of like interaction with new people, diplomatic moment, et cetera, et cetera. So however awkward it might have been, at least it wasn't quite as bad of a setup as it could have been, right?
Yeah, observing the forms, so to speak. Yeah, all the
Yeah.
court diplomacy and doing all the right things and saying the right, smiling at the right time and complimenting people. Yeah, all the stuff that we see. Yeah, picture Arya Hota observing the court when Doran gets the skull, and some people are saying all the right things, like, yes, we can finally put the enmity behind us, even though everybody's like, no, we can't. Some people are drinking, some people are pouring their drinks out, that kind of stuff.
Another thought on this, and I haven't thought this out very well, but I'm just thinking about the difference, because a lot of this is about the difference between Aenys and Aegon, right? Or Maegor, rather. That I wonder how different a perspective and a personality and a leader they would have developed into when Maegor, not only, being under Visenya, who would have had a different approach than Aegon, but also the things he's observing are a little bit more, I think, people coming to the Targaryens where we need this from you, right? You have all this power and we need your assistance. Whereas Aegon is going out to other people saying, hey, how can I assist you? Right? It's a different interaction. It's a different fundamental stand that they're taking when they interact with the different people. And I wonder how much that leads Maegor to being a little bit more arrogant and maybe even frustrated with people.
Yeah, they're more just like a chore to him. To Maegor, people, supplicants coming to petition for various things are again just like, they're always asking for very tedious things that are kind of depressing or not cool. Whereas I think you're right that Aegon and Aenys would have much more fun with their experiences of dealing with petitioners and a more positive spin on it.
Aenys especially, that's a great point. He would love to be the guy that's giving people what they want and giving them justice and being seen to be praised for doing the right thing. And that's what a lot of you do when you're holding court. You're like, hey, I have this problem, King. Can you settle this? And he's like, yes, I can settle this. And he would probably take a lot of satisfaction in that. Whereas I agree with you. I think Maegor and Visenya might find that tedious.
Yeah. And Aenys is... part of Aegon's intention is learning about these other people and their cultures, right?
So you have to listen.
Whereas Maegor's not learning about the other people and the cultures.
He doesn't care.
And feels like he has to deal with these people, where Aenys feels like he gets to go help them. And I could just see that start off in their careers, setting them in very different mindsets.
It's a lot like Robert Baratheon. Robert Baratheon isn't nearly as brutal as Maegor, but he does like to fight. That they have that in common. He liked to fight. He wasn't mean or cruel about it or sadistic or psychopathic, but he enjoyed fighting. And he hated ruling. He thought it very tedious. It was boring to him. He just was like, let me get out there and fight. And that's Maegor. Maegor loves tournaments and all this other stuff. It's like, yeah, there's some real parallels there. So
how much of that is Maegor's DNA versus his upbringing, right? The thing he could do that was fun and to prove himself was go win a tournament. The thing Aenys could do that was fun and to prove himself was go help out other lords.
Yeah.
So
in a lot of ways,
it's going to happen when they're put in a position of power.
You might even see why Aegon thought, hey, this is pretty good. The one who's going to be in charge is the one that has the patience for this, and the one that if anyone comes at him, well, my second son will put them in their place. He might have had a rose-colored lens on, like, yeah, look how perfect that is. I've got my warrior son, going to back up my ruling son. Hey, it's perfect. Yeah, well, not so much, but you can see it that way.
We might be looking at things in a 2020 hindsight lens.
True.
Right?
Very
it didn't happen to work out, but is it definitely a mistake that Aegon made? It's hard to say.
So if we're getting back to this peace conference or this peace dinner, whatever we call it, Daria would have been would have had some goals or things to accomplish. One, would you just make sure this whole thing goes off without a hitch, make sure there's no violence, make sure it all goes fine. Everybody sees that there's peace. Everybody sees that they're not kowtowing to what the Targaryens want. These are still independent nations. But they'd also want to suss out Aenys. Like, is this guy going to want revenge for his mother? Like his father did? Like, how does he feel about it? And I think they'd probably come away feeling pretty good about it because he's such a amiable, like, nice person. I'd probably be like, well, either this guy's really putting on an act or he's not going to come at us. And the latter was certainly true. Aegon Aenys wouldn't have time to come after them, even if he had wanted to. His reign's going to be beset by internal problems. Like the idea of raising an army and going to Dorne would be nuts, given what's going to happen.
It's also worth noting that even if he is just putting on an act, at least he understands he needs to put on the act. That's also important and valuable.
So think about this from Aegon's perspective. He has to sit there and drink toasts and say nice things to the people that he perceives as killing the person he loved most in this world and may have tortured her afterwards and used her life as a bargaining chip, potentially. Ooh, yeah. Talk about having to pretend to really talk about having to put your diplomatic face first, because behind, deep down, he was probably feeling some things, some anger, some sadness, a little of both, maybe a lot of both. Yeah, definitely he was having emotions, though. This couldn't have been just another trip south. I'm going to go get out of this dinner and then let me get this over with. No, I'm sure he had a lot. Like, we always have strong examples from A Song of Ice and Fire for these social situations. I love it. Wyman Manderley having to, pretend to be happy with the phrase who killed his son at the Red Wedding. I mean, this man had to really pretend, and he did a really good job. And he's continuing to keep that up until he finally got the chance. And then he let it out like, good, or he would have grown up to be a Frey, he gets to finally unleash what he's really been thinking all this time. And murdering Freys on the road and being like, I don't know what happened to them. So, yeah. And that's what the Dornishmen are thinking. They're like, well, he's saying these nice things, but is he going to have some of our people killed when we're not looking? Like, what is this guy? They have to be worried about revenge from someone so powerful.
I wonder if there's any part of this trip is to get Visenya's or to get Rhaenys' bodies back. I wonder if any of this was part of the original letter that was sent. Like, if you keep the peace 10 years from now,
wouldn't be much body left to give. There'd just be bones, but still, that's something. Yeah. Bones matter. But the Targaryens burn their body. Yeah, we never hear about her body being returned. Only the skull of Meraxes, which is part of what makes the mystery a little deeper. Because if we had the body, that would tell us a little something. That wouldn't tell us a whole lot, but yeah, it's possible.
But maybe he needed to keep that secret. Maybe the reason we don't know is because the people that do know needed to keep that piece of it secret to keep up the front of the piece or whatever. I don't know. This is just another piece to me. This is another piece of the mystery. The fact that they go back 10 years later for this meeting and it goes well, that is another piece to consider to figure out what was in that letter.
Right on. Yeah, I agree. I think it is worth considering. By the way, a good point from Nina here is he still calls himself King of the Rhoynar. He still declares himself their king, even though he had signed this Treaty of Eternal Peace. He didn't stop calling himself their king, even though it didn't have any real authority behind it. And of course, they're going to keep saying that until it actually does become true, 160 years later, 170-ish. Anyway, here's another point from Nina. Maybe Aegon applied a Westerosi lesson he might have learned on his progresses and made a point of a public show of guest right, asking for bread and salt for himself and his son, of course. That would be important, rather than just showing up and being like, hey, this is a good, observing the forms, diplomatic forms. This would be quite possible, because that's an ultimate sign using Westerosi culture of, I'm going to not murder you while you're here. And if I do, then I deserve all the chagrin, all the retribution, shame. Yeah, like whatever Walder Frey deserves. This is what they would deserve. Because yes, he did give Robb bread and salt and still did all that. So it is a paper shield, but it's a pretty big paper shield.
And it's good on both sides too. Both it's assuring on both sides that this is going to go over well, and they're both bought into Westerosi culture.
Yeah,
so.
And they showed up on their dragons. It's not like there isn't the unspoken threat there to back them. It's like, hey, if you murder us, who knows what those dragons will do, So yeah, and we know it was Daria Martell ruling. We know Nymor died during that 10 years. He might have died right after the peace. He might have died right before this peace dinner. We don't really know. But either way, seeing Daria again would be a pretty big deal. I mean, she is the one who led that peace delegation. So whether it was Nymor, Nymor this, Nymor that, Daria is the one who actually came to King's Landing and handed the letter to Aegon and was like, "For your eyes only, your grace." She's the one that took the risk to her person, traveling with Meraxes' skull through dangerous territory. She's the one that would have been seized and had awful things happen to her if the suggestions at court had been accepted. Right, like make her, put her in a brothel, cut her hand off, all those things. Like, so this is a person who's been in the dragon's mouth and walked back out. This is a person that's gone through some things. She's brave, or at least had done a very brave thing. Now, yeah. So her actions. Yeah, go ahead.
Real quick, I want to say this is, in some very fundamental ways, different from the rest of the progresses, but in some ways very similar too. Like you said, like bringing the dragons with them is just this reminder, like, we're not at war right now, but don't forget we still have these dragons. If you prompted us, we would just start burning your fields and your cities and everything down again. We haven't, lost what we had before.
So it's interesting to trace this meeting to what's going to happen when Aegon dies. When Aegon dies, of course, lots of things are going to erupt. Dorne is one of them. The Vulture King will emerge and attack the Reach, or the Marches, which includes the Reach, but mostly the Stormlands, really. Daria is going to claim, I have nothing to do with this. I got, this isn't my, this is Vulture King is a rebel. But is he? It's certainly there's the idea that he might be a proxy, or that she's helping him in secret, that she really didn't get him started, but she's happy to help him in secret and to maybe do some things here and there.
Or just not going after him in and of itself.
Exactly, just ignoring it, yeah, and saying, oh, this is out of my hands, yeah. So when she takes the measure of Prince Aenys here and sees what kind of man he is, learns the kind of person he is, and then gets to see the next 15, 18 years play out, no, almost 14 years actually would be the right number, and judging the kind of person he is and guesstimating that, hey, we could get away with this under him. We might not be able to under Aegon, but under this guy, yeah, absolutely. So, yep, that's quite a thing. Let's turn our eyes back to the internal Targaryen scenario and talk about their marriages. Quote,
"The tradition amongst the Targaryens had always been to marry kin to kin. Wedding brother to sister was thought to be ideal. Failing that, a girl might wed an uncle, a cousin, or a nephew, a boy, a cousin, aunt, or niece. This practice went back to old Valyria, where it was common amongst many of the ancient families, particularly those who bred and rode dragons. The blood of the dragon must remain pure, the wisdom went. Some of the sorcerer princes also took more than one wife when it pleased them, though this was less common than incestuous marriage.
That last line is very peculiar and needs to be explored elsewhere. It doesn't have much to do with what we're talking about today, but the fact that it's sorcerer princes that did this and maybe not some of the other ones makes me really curious, because when we asked George about blood magic and incest in Old Valyria, he did say that the blood magicians also practiced incest. So maybe, and it sounds like these things are related. If you have people who practice blood magic and you have Valyrian princes from the 40 families, some of them are both, and maybe that's who these sorcerer princes are. And maybe that's why they practice polygamy and or incest, because if they have permanently affected their own genetics, they want to be able to spread that by having children. Now, it's still very interesting as well that polygamy is less common than incestuous marriage, and Aegon's was both. Aegon practiced a polygamous incestuous marriage, so he just clearly thought he was above both that. I don't know. I don't know what he thought of himself as compared to the others. He probably just did what he thought he could get away with, and that's fine from where he's sitting, which is the Iron Throne. That's where he's sitting. This also clarifies for us that they don't seem to have any qualms about any old pairing within the family. Aunt to nephew, little boy to a cousin. It doesn't matter. Like any related, if it's If it works, it works for them. And apparently a lot of things work. I guess all they really cared about was, will this match produce children? And because of the magic, it's not bound by the rules of the real world where incest marriages make it harder to have children.
A little rhyme for you. Where they're like,
a rhyme?
Yeah.
I love a good rhyme.
Relate it, consummate it. There you go.
Nice. Those were the Targaryens' real house words before they came to Westeros. They were like,
related and consummated?
Incest is the best. Put your family to the test.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's him.
They live that. That's the whole nation of Valyria's motto. It's like in God we trust for America or whatever. It's not our national motto, in God we trust, or is that just on our money?
It's on our money.
I don't really think it fits either way.
I don't know if we have a national motto.
Is it? I think it might be that. Or is it? What is E pluribus unum? Isn't that the same? That's not the same thing, is it? Everybody's looking it up. Both of you guys are looking it up right
in
now.
God we trust. It is our national motto.
Okay.
It is.
Does every country have a national motto? I mean, it's not like there's some world standard. You must have a national motto or you're not a country.
Oh, I see. We also have the traditional E pluribus unum from many one.
Oh,
so yeah, there's a few, but I don't know.
Yeah,
this is the modern. It says this is the modern one, and the E pluribus is the older one for the seal.
Established in 1956.
Yeah.
In God we trust.
Oh, so that's relatively new. Yeah, that was during the Red Scare, wasn't it? Because those godless communists. I think it was a pushback against communism, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, they also added under God to the Pledge of Allegiance in 1954. So yeah, it was all yep.
That's also when we were worried about them taking our precious bodily fluids. Good old Dr. Strange love reference for y'all. So let's have another quote, continuing on with the incest practice and Valyrian marriages, etc.
In Valyria, before the doom, wise men wrote, 1,000 gods were honored, but none were feared. So few dared to speak against these customs. This was not true in Westeros, where the power of the faith went unquestioned.
Maybe that's why.
I don't know.
What'd you say?
I was like, I don't know why it goes completely unquestioned.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I think there's some questioners.
There is some people questioning the power of the faith, definitely. So for example, the Targaryens. Like, Maegor absolutely questions their power later and puts it to the test.
Or in the
with
north,
sword and
which
dragon.
is technically part of Westeros right now at this very moment, and
Yeah,
then
they're
at the
definitely
writing.
questioning it. And the Iron Islands questions it too.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
The priests of R'hllor. Yeah, lots of people question it. But that might be part of it. Maybe they were the Targaryens were just so used to doing whatever they wanted, and it was just accepted that maybe they thought that the faith would give them a little bit of a pass. I don't know. Really powerful people can sometimes just... It seems like a stretch to us, but when you have such power and privilege, you might think that you can get away with things that to us would be like unthinkable.
I guess also you could clarify, like maybe the Iron Islands question that the power of the faith is greater than their own God's power, or question it whether it should be worshipped or even whether it exists. But you can't question that the faith has power, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not ultimate power, or maybe not the power we care about, but it clearly has powers.
Yeah. So yeah, and clearly has a lot of power, and that's part of why Aegon cozied up to it. He's like, well, I'm not gonna take on this power structure. I'm going to try to sit at the top of it, or at least make it my friend. And it starts to really matter because this is when the princes and princesses start to be born. The big purpose of this episode is to show the first birth of the House of the Dragon in terms of family members. And these are family members that are going to be set to marry each other eventually, and that's where the problems begin, or at least where the problems are exacerbated. While Aenys was at this peace dinner in Sunspear, it appears that his wife, Alyssa, was pregnant, because later in the year, Rhaena is born. This is Aegon's first grandchild. We're told he cried when he first held her, which is a curious moment given all the stoicism and lack of personality assigned to him, but it might also be because of Rhaenys. Like, she's named for Rhaenys. This would have been her grandchild. It's a girl. It might look like her. Probably does in terms of hair and eyes. I mean, they have that sort of I wouldn't say it's all homogenous, but it's a rare trait that only they have for the most part in Westeros. Now, I'm not someone who thinks crying is weakness, and many societies and throughout history didn't either. Like, if you ever read, like, Homer, not Simpson, but I did make that joke every single time because it never gets old. But
it makes me laugh every time.
Yeah, so why would I stop, right? Achilles and the Greeks of the Trojan War did not think it was unmanly. For example, he cries a bunch of times, right? He cries when he's mad. He cries when he's just what they did. It was considered normal and acceptable, showing emotion. What's the big deal? In world, well, the same thing. The Carthene, they weep often and freely, and it's not unmanly. So George certainly acknowledges that there's just different societal views on men crying. In Westeros, it is unmanly. Let's be clear. I'm not trying to make a point about what it should be like in Westeros versus what it is. It is considered unmanly by a lot of people in Westeros, especially the powerful people in Westeros. So that's why it's a curious moment. The fact that they would write this, the fact that it might be true, it definitely humanizes Aegon a bit, assuming it's true. And Visenya immediately proposes, not opposes, the opposition will come from the other people, proposes betrothing Rhaena to Maegor. There's a big age gap, but, obviously, given what we just said with these quotes, it's not that strange, especially given the girl is the younger one, which is the less unusual pairing. Like, when you have a 1-year-old boy married to a 12-year-old girl, that is a little unusual. Well, a marriage would be very unusual there. A betrothal would be. But even that happens, especially because that is what's going to happen to Maegor, in fact. Now, you can see the sense in this arrangement, though. Even with despite the age gap, it unites the two lines. It removes questions of succession. This is when we talk about Visenya and her aim with her son earlier. This says unity between the families, two branches of the family. She's trying to create unity. Yes, it's also a power move for her branch of the family, which is the lesser branch in terms of prestige. But you can't just put it all onto that. Because it absolutely would have created stability in theory. Of course, who knows how it would have really gone if they had actually gotten married and all that. But
and it doesn't take away power from the other branch either, right? In fact, in almost any other marriage, takes more power away than this would.
Yeah, so. It makes it one branch. It almost just create. Yeah, exactly. So now things could have been complicated by this arrangement if Aenys and Alyssa followed up with a son. So now you have Maegor and Rhaena married together, and then they have a son. So who gets precedence? Because you could say, well, Rhaena, Visenya wasn't Lady of Dragonstone, so the Targaryens clearly have this male thing going on, so it should pass to the boy. But if Maegor is already married to Rhaena, they've already got a paired Targaryen prince. Why would they skip that over? So it might have actually created some new complications rather than just settling the other ones. So it's possible that could have been a problem.
Some other complications might have come from the 12-year-old aggressive, arrogant boy going through puberty, expected to wait for the newborn baby to grow up and marry him. Like, he's going to sleep around, right?
That's
and
possible,
probably have some bastards or not agree to the marriage or who knows, but that's probably not going to go perfectly smooth the way all the adults want. So.
Good point. And either way, it comes up, the rejections come immediately. Apparently, Aegon never weighs in, which is interesting. The High Septon's like, no. And he says, no, we can't accept that. And Aenys and Alyssa say no, too. So that's just it. I'm like, unless Aegon orders them to accept it, that's the end of it. So this could really matter later. This rejection could matter. Keep this in your back pocket. Don't forget about this rejection. It might be taken personally by Visenya, by Maegor, or by both of them. We know why the High Septon says no. That's very straightforward. But it's actually not quite so straightforward. It's not just about the incest marriage, because Aenys and Alyssa go ahead and marry their children together anyway. So they weren't worried about that. They weren't worried about the incest aspect to Maegor and Rhaena. They go ahead and marry their daughter and their son together anyway. So that's not it. But Maegor is going to marry a Hightower. So his refusal to accept Maegor's marriage to Rhaena does become a marriage to the family that's closest to the High Septon. So
I wonder, why did Aenys refuse it? I wonder what what their angle was.
I don't know. It might have been more about Alyssa. Alyssa didn't seem to like Maegor, and oh gosh, I wonder why. I mean, the dude was full of red, was a walking red flag, but it might have just been that, just that Maegor was like, no, we don't want that, or they wanted to keep it within their own family. They were set on having a son, to marry their daughter. And that's what they wanted.
Yeah, they were like, let's marry her to our firstborn son, keep it age appropriate. And again, I think it's very likely they both or one or whatever saw Maegor's red flags.
Yeah, he's 12 at this time. Well, keep that in mind. He had no friends. He'd already shown violence towards animals and maybe violence towards like servants. So, yeah, lots of red flags. And they might have been worried about his ambition. He might have shown red flags about ambition as well, which would have been, ooh, yeah, like, what's he going to do? Like, we don't want to marry our daughter to this man. Just as parents, we don't want this man to marry our daughter. Just that simple. It could be that simple. But I imagine it isn't just one reason. It's probably multiple reasons.
Yeah.
And I'm still just really interesting about Aegon not weighing in at all that we know of. Maybe he just agreed. He's like, yeah, let's not do that. But he didn't feel the need to say so because it would rub it in Visenya and Maegor's faces. But they might have been upset that he didn't force it or weigh in. They'd be like, why don't you have something to say here, King, Dad,
yeah, I mean,
husband?
I wonder if he was like, it's the prerogative of the parents. They are the parents. It's not my decision.
He's the king someday. I don't tell I'm not going to decide who marries who unless I have to. And
yeah.
have to.
Except he or his agents had been doing that for people left and right across the realm.
Yeah.
So it seems weird to suddenly now not do it for his own family.
Not for his heir and the future king and like who's now has his firstborn child. I don't know. I could see it as being, this is your, testing ground, as it were, and this is one of your first big things that you're doing on your own. I don't know. I think him treating Aenys differently than everyone else in the realm makes sense.
That makes sense. Yeah, maybe he needed to give his son his own agency, and it's one of those interesting things. Though, like if this were made into a show, there would be a lot of drama around this. I mean, just think about the scene when Olenna and Marjorie go to question Sansa about Joffrey, right? Like there might be some parallel to that.
Yeah, I kind of picture that it would. I wonder how much Aenys was blind to it or very aware of it, and how much anyone else would have had to be like, no, look, like, Aenys, be real with yourself. He's not all there, or something like that. Or if Aenys knew it, and like, that's my question, is whether Aenys kind of had rose-colored glasses and wanted to love. Because, like, think about this. This is like his little brother, right? And like, you might think, but you might think that he would have some real like warmth in his heart for him, and not one of, especially he's 12 years old only. He might be like, no, he's still a boy, he's still grown. You might think that Aenys wouldn't just think of him as a lost cause.
Yeah, Aenys is 17. By the way, just to remind ourselves at this point. Alyssa also 17.
We see Viserys let Daemon get away with a lot too.
Oh yeah,
right?
Very true, very true.
But we also see, I think Viserys is not unaware of his proclivities or issues as well, right? Like he isn't completely just like blinders on either.
Yeah, and Viserys did show some spine occasionally. Now Aenys will as well. Aenys is going to like exile Maegor, which is, you obviously don't do that lightly, and that showed some that he wasn't afraid of him, so. Yeah, but he had to be pushed pretty far. Kind of like Viserys had to be pushed pretty far to like come down on Daemon. So maybe just Aegon, another way to look is maybe Aegon just isn't that active of a family patriarch. He's, like you said, Sean, he's more concerned with the realm. He's on his progresses all the time, and Aenys was with him on a lot of these progresses, and Alyssa was as well. Although this would be, her participation in the progresses would have to slow down, I think, because she's going to have 5 children over the next 10 years ish. So definitely pregnancies and royal progresses aren't always able to happen at the same time. I mean, you're 1 or 2 months in, sure, travel a bit, but
well, that's my other question.
6 months pregnant, no, you're not going on royal progress.
Well, how many times were they like out on royal progress and they're like, she's pregnant, and then they like stay somewhere longer or fly her back on the dragon quickly? I don't know.
That's nice. You could just take her dragon back home. Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm not sure if I think it's more or less likely, but for
Air Force One, Targaryen Force One, just fly that back. I guess hers would be Force 4. Valerian's number 1. So yeah, it's just really interesting how Aegon just doesn't pop up. All these family disputes, all these things are happening. It's like, why isn't Aegon? He just isn't present for any of this. It's just really interesting how often he's just like, well, yeah, figure it out yourselves, y'all. Which I somewhat respect. Figure it out yourselves, but you kind of, she should weigh in sometimes. You know, they're 17, like I just said. Like, like yes, it's good to like let them be adults, but they're not. I mean, by the standards of his society, they are, but they're teenagers. Come on, man. Yeah, and it's also not super clear to me where like the rest of the family spent their time, because the 20s were a decade where the Targaryen family exploded in terms of numbers, as Aenys and Alyssa, like I said, just kept having kids. And well, where were they? Were they at the Aegon fort? Were they at Dragonstone? Like which was their place to be in between? Because we hear about this incident where Alyssa teases Maegor about not having a dragon. It's like, what, are you afraid, you know? And we'll come back to that later. But that clearly means they were at the same location at that time. And Rhaena, the firstborn, is going to take on like the real older sister mode. She's going to mother her younger siblings. And I wonder if that's partly because their parents were gone a lot on their progresses or whatever. She kind of had to be a second mother to her younger siblings because her parents were king and queen, and well, they're rather busy and traveling a lot and didn't have time to be full-time parents. And a lot of they were probably raised a lot by maesters and nursemaids and other servants and men-at-arms and things like that. So Rhaena seems to have had that nurturing instinct. And yeah, so probably back and forth. I mean, there isn't one answer to this. Sometimes they would be at Dragonstone. Sometimes they would be at King's Landing. Sometimes they would be at the Aegon Fort. Later, they'll be at the Red Keep. But the Red Keep won't exist until after Aegon's reign is over. It will be started during it, but it won't be finished till later. So there has to have been some movement here and there, and that would create all sorts of interesting different scenarios with different people and different flexible court scenarios of different people there. And anyway, I'm rambling. Let's move on. You know, there's a lot of ways that you can describe something you like to get people interested in it. And if you're a show like ours, if you describe a product that you use or that you're pitching, of course, one of the reasons you're pitching it is because you've got a company paying you to do that. So you want something a little, sometimes it's good to have a little more real information, like behind the scenes, like what's really going on here. Are they just pitching this product to me because they're being paid, or do they really like it? Well, one of the best ways I think we can prove that we are really, really genuinely behind this Magic Mind beverage is that they gave us a good amount of it to help. You know, they gave us a box of it. We drank it. They gave us another box of it. We drank. That's both locations, Sean in Denver and me and Shay here in Atlanta. Because it takes a while for it to work. You got to drink it for a while for some of the effects to really take hold. So it makes sense that we'd spread that out a bit. Now, it's been a few months, so we've mostly run through our free product. Shay and I bought it ourselves. We're still pitching it, but we bought it with our own money. That's pretty darn. Yeah, and Sean did too. So all of us.
I only got the one first box, sample box.
Oh, right on. So, I mean, I think that says a lot. I mean, right? We actually have invested in this ourselves. So yeah, we're fully bought in, I guess you could say. And you can go to get some yourself. You can get in it with us. MagicMind.com Westeros is where you can go to get 56% off your subscription. If you use the code Westeros20, it can be a little more, but they've always got some sort of special going on. So whenever you do hear this and decide it's time to begin Magic Mind, and I hope that's soon, use that code Westeros20, and the sooner the better, though, because the deal right now is particularly good. And also the sooner the better for you to start having better focus, maybe drinking less coffee, maybe thinking a little more clearly, and that has a trickle-down effect on the rest of your life. If the early part of your day goes well, then your evenings will probably go better as well. I tend to crash earlier if my day starts badly, and I think Magic Mind's helped out with that. So yeah, Westeros 20, magicmind.com/Westeros. Go ahead, Sean.
Minor side note, Pete Holmes, maybe my favorite comedian, and he has a podcast he's been doing for like 15 years. This is also one of his sponsors. So that's also like, I don't know, an extra buy-in for me to see some other figure out there who also
He's
is,
just like you, Sean.
He's just
for real,
like you.
for real.
Yeah, FR. And you met Pete Holmes and said he was a really nice guy, didn't you?
Yeah. And he, in a lot of ways, he really is a lot like me. I read his book, and there's several like sort of like landmark moments of his life, like something he read or watched, like me too. That had a big impact on me too. He's really been on this sort of spiritual journey through his life, and just kind of questioning, how are we supposed to behave? How do we move through society? Where do all these religions come from? What do they mean? He's a comedian, but he has this sort of deeper side to him too, and that I don't know. He's looking for enlightenment, and I don't know. I'm rambling a little bit myself now, but I do relate to him in a lot of ways, and so it is neat that this thing that we're sponsoring he's also sponsoring. So
that's good. Yeah, right on. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit update on our topics moot going on over at patreon.com/History of Westeros. We ran an authorial poll, then a historical influence poll, and then ran the winners of those two polls against each other. And the top vote getter was the Wars of the Roses. So we'll be doing an episode on that. It might actually take more than one. We'll see. And an episode on Rome, Rome's parallels and influence on A Song of Ice and Fire. But in third place was a tie. So we're going to have a runoff. That's pretty exciting. We have never had a poll runoff before. Figures.
Where'd it run off to?
Yeah. I don't know. They ran off to tie the knot. And they are... So we're gonna have a runoff for that. Like I said, it's the first time it's ever happened. Pretty exciting. Figures that it would happen during Topics Moot, something poll related that's never happened to us before. And the runoff is between J.R.R. Tolkien and The Black Dinner. The Black Dinner was the influence for The Red Wedding, and J.R.R. Tolkien is J.R.R. Tolkien, the guy who wrote Lord of the Rings. Of course, you've heard of him. He's George R. R. Martin's favorite author, so that's obviously a big influence on him.
So, he was also an inspiration for one of South Park's characters.
Yes, I suppose that's true. We also have a poll running right now. Young POV character versus young non-POV characters. We did one poll for each, and the winners advanced to compete against each other at the end. The 6 winners, which are currently being voted on, are Aemon, Melisandre, Old Nan, so young Nan for purposes of that episode, Jaime Lannister, Varys, and Barristan. One of those is not like the others, and I mean you, Jaime Lannister, because all these characters are pretty old. It makes sense that people would pick, for looking at their young life, people would pick characters that have a lot of relatively younger life to talk about. You know, the older you are, the more your young life can span, I suppose.
The
and yeah,
thing I found funny was that Jaime got like a good 20 or 30 more votes than Cersei.
Yeah.
Even though
and they both crushed Tyrion,
yeah.
too. Like.
And even though it's a similar childhood.
Yeah. I find it funny, the idea that we could do an episode on the War of the Roses.
Yeah, it's going to take more
Rome,
than one,
for that matter.
Yeah. Rome might actually be less, because I think the influences are not so huge. There's some big ones, and Rome itself is just so influential.
Yeah.
But, you know.
I think about it every day.
You think about the Roman Empire every day, of course, like the meme says, you know. And, yeah, because it's like Westeros isn't particularly like Rome. Slaver's Bay and Old Valyria have some things in common. But yeah, there's things to say, that's for sure. And we'll be digging into that, because that was the second highest vote getter. All right, let's get back to our topic today. We are in the year 25 AC now. Maegor has a big year. There's a melee. He's 13 years old, and he wins it. Veteran knights taken down by Maegor. Very proud moment for him. Very proud for his dad and his mom, most likely. Visenya's probably nodding, and like, yeah, that's right. That's my son right there. And then he marries Cerise Hightower in Old Town. She was 23, so instead of marrying someone 12 years younger than him, he married someone 10 years older than him. Was the melee at Old Town too? Might have been. I don't know. We have no idea where the melee was, but he married her the same year, so it makes sense. Old Town would be a likely enough place for such an event, but really, it could have been anywhere. It could have been King's Landing. Probably not Dragonstone. It's a little bit remote, but it's possible. And it's a political marriage that has a lot of sense to it. For Aegon, it again connects him to the faith, who he's trying to cozy up to, and the Hightowers are about as close as you can get to the faith. And Cerise was the niece of the current High Septon, as well as the daughter of the Lord of the Hightower. So it really ties them directly to both. So when we say it's a perfect marriage, like Cerise was a really perfect candidate because of her unique connection to both the High Septon and House Hat. I always struggle to say House Hightower. So, which is part of why they were willing to be a little loose with the ages here. They're like, yeah, 13-year-old boy, 23-year-old woman. That's not usually how they do these marriages, but it's not exactly unprecedented either. He was so sure. Now, we go into some more detail on this in our Under the Dragons House Hightower episodes. There's 2 of them. But we're focusing on it from the Targaryen angle this time. A son for House Targaryen is what Maegor declared he made very confidently that wedding night, but of course he did not. Had he done so, it would have been the first grandson for Aegon. And that's an interesting race, like was Maegor wanting to have the first grandson for the house? It's like, well, he wasn't the first son, but he could make the first grandson. But, no. And the other reason for him to want that is that might be a son to marry Rhaena. If his son marries Rhaena, that would be age appropriate, and it would be harder for Aenys and Alyssa to say no to that. And they might not say no to it because, just because it's Maegor's son doesn't mean it's going to be like Maegor. They might be worried about that, and they might want to hold off for a few years just to find out if he's got the Maegor, DNA, too much of it. But it would be harder to say no to, not from the High Septon's perspective. Although maybe it would have, because that would have been a Hightower baby as well. So, what an interesting child that would have been. If Maegor had a boy with Cerise Hightower before Rhaena and Aenys had their baby Aegon. Oh boy, would that have been interesting.
Another motivation for Maegor to have a son is Cerise Hightower might have just been hot.
That's true. That's good motivation right there. Yeah. And so this is the Greens before the Greens, right? This was if they had any kids, it would have become like a scenario a lot like the Greens. But since they had no children, then that just was cut off before it could become a thing. And it still was kind of a thing. It just wasn't as much as a thing as it could have been because there wasn't other princes and princelings involved, and other alliances would have been made, other marriages would have been made, and it would have just made the whole thing a bigger mess. And it's and because of the way Westeros is such a patriarchal society, if Maegor has a son, that just makes him more of a man. That's just how Westeros works. It's kind of hard for us to think that on those terms or to put ourselves in those shoes. But fathering sons is considered manly. Fathering daughters is considered manly too. But he couldn't do either. But especially fathering sons is considered manly in Westeros. As much as, you're supposed to father sons, be good at fighting, and not cry. That's Westeros manhood in a nutshell right there. And Maegor continues to refuse hatchlings all throughout this time. He's still like, no, I don't want any stupid hatchling. A half dozen different hatchlings he refuses. So it's clearly not about the color or the horns or how long the neck is or whatever other traits you look for in a hatchling. And we don't know when this happened. This probably wasn't just like one day they brought him 6 hatchlings on a platter and he refused them all. It was probably one in the first year, then another one a few months later, and then here's another one that just hatched. Maybe he likes green. Here's a green dragon for you, Maegor. No, he doesn't like green. Well, here's a pink one. No, he definitely doesn't like pink. So this might be when Alyssa teased him about being afraid of dragons. And there's a chance she knew. She figured it out. Alyssa's smart. She might understand what he's doing by refusing these hatchlings. She might get that he's waiting for the big one. Because what else would he be doing? She doesn't really think he's scared. That doesn't make sense.
But if she does the old Back to the Future, what are you, chicken? Are you yellow? All that sort of thing, then yeah, it might actually work to make Maegor lose his cool and no, I'm not chicken. Yeah. I'll tame a dragon right now. Didn't work,
but it was worth a try.
Yeah.
Because that's a very powerful spell. Those 4 words, it's the simplest cast spell in Westeros. What are you scared? And like variations, like Ashaya said, what are you, chicken? Or why are you scared? Or what? Or either why or what, or are you scared, or are you chicken? Any of those variations, it's the most provocative question in Westeros.
It's also very provocative in 1985. And in the Old West.
Yes.
It's
the
And
most
in the
powerful
future.
spell on men that's ever existed. The most powerful 4 words that have ever existed for challenging aggressive men. Yeah. You have to use the right inflection and tone, right? What, are you scared? Like, it adds more juice to the spell. It's like more mana is put into the spell.
Especially
like
coming
that.
from Alyssa, like herself, a woman and a
Yes.
dragon rider. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, that's
yeah.
right. So Maegor, she may have figured it out that he was trying to go for a bigger dragon. It might have been like, well, I don't want him to do that. Maybe I can talk him into through shame into taking a smaller dragon now.
That's another scenario I'd want to see the details play out on screen. I bet he was motivated by that and did want to tame a dragon if Visenya had to stop him.
He's like,
you
no,
know?
yeah. I'm like, no, wait, patience, my son. I haven't counseled you patience in many things, but patience in this one is a good thing. I wonder which hatchlings those were. I mean, Dreamfire doesn't work. Dreamfire's the oldest one I could think of, but Dreamfire is a hatchling a few years from now, so it doesn't quite work. I don't think they stay hatchlings for 6 years or 8 years, so I don't think that works. My best guess is one of them was the cannibal. And boy, if a dragon ever exudes Maegor's personality, it's that one. The one that eats its own, and it has no loyalty towards its own so much so. And it's even black with green eyes, just like Shaggy Dog. Those colors, something about that coloration is very demonic or self-fighting if you think about the blacks versus the greens when the cannibal was alive. So again, Maegor, Aemon comes back to us here. Aemon will wait and then claim Vhagar as soon as Vhagar comes available. And yes, similar, very similar. And in fact, who, not to confuse y'all, but who was the rider of Vhagar before Aemon? Well, yeah,
This should have been the trivia question.
It's Laena,
Yeah, it's
right?
Laena. I was just confused about why you were asking us
Right.
this.
Yeah, so from one faction to another is kind of the point. The big dragon shifts factions.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, so this is also the same year that King's Landing moves into 3rd place size-wise. Bigger than Gulltown and White Harbor, better access to foreign markets because of its proximity to the free cities as compared to like Old Town and Lannisport. It's closer to them. Lots of merchants would see an opportunity to get in on the ground floor in a burgeoning market. Well, get in King's Landing in the year 25, you're sitting pretty. Another 10 years go by. You're established. You got 10 years in the city that's grown around you, and your business will grow with it. Might be easier to get started at a new city than it is to break into the existing markets of Lannisport and Old Town, where they already are probably well occupied by the existing rich powers, right? Like the existing, got to be in with the Hightowers. You got to be in with the Lannisters, or at least the people that they're in with to get a good deal, get some breaks on customs or whatever.
And especially when you consider like the scale of things and the age of these cities, like it's not necessarily even like these upper lords you're competing with, just the random local farmers. They already own their land and pass it on in their families for generations on all the area around Lannisport or Old Town or wherever else. But King's Landing, there's plenty of new farmland for anyone to make a stake on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the lords of the Narrow Sea as well, their fortunes rose significantly. Driftmark and Dragonstone itself, and of course Massey's Hook and Claw Isle. These places have gained significant wealth and power partly just because of their connection to the Targaryen royal house, but also just because this era of growth has enabled everyone. The rising tide lifts all boats. So all the free cities would trade with them more too. They'd all have more money to spend, and they'd all be potential in routes to the Targaryens. Like, make friends with the Celtigars, maybe that gets me in with the Targaryens later. They might not have cared about that as much 100 years ago, and they would have less reason to. So it all stands to reason. So new connections for the Lords of the Narrow Sea, all sorts of benefits in this region and growth. Consider the difference in perspective, though. We turn it back to the human side of things. Aegon and Visenya and Orys and Ethan Velaryon and Osmond Strong and a lot of these other guys would remember what it was like before King's Landing even existed. And now you have these new Targaryens, these kids on their lawn, who were born into a world where it's already the third largest city in just like a generation and a half. Or maybe you can call that 2 generations. I don't know. It's just a world of difference. Like the world, in my day, we didn't have this giant smelly city, like it literally wasn't here, and these aren't like old people. Like these aren't like people in their 80s and 90s. This isn't like Walder Frey, like, I lived during the Blackfire rebellions. No, this wasn't that long ago. This is like us thinking back on like 9/11 or something, the turn of the century. Like it's not that long ago, historically speaking, but from a perspective wise, like no city versus huge city. That's just such a bigger difference. And like Rhaena and Alyssa and Aegon and young Aegon were born into this world where King's Landing existed, and Aegon and Visenya were like, yeah, these kids today don't know what it was like before. The following year is the year 26. So the year 25 was one of the most bustling years. 26, a little less so. But Aegon was born. The first grandson. Pretty big deal. So all Maegor must have been disappointed. Visenya maybe as well. Certainly Alyssa and Aenys were not disappointed. They may have been relieved. Who knows? Like they were like, oh, phew, we beat Maegor. Didn't want that to happen. And now it just seals it all up. Like, okay, we can keep it within the family. So as they're maybe relaxing a bit and knowing that they can keep it all on their side of the family, that creates problems down the road for how the Faith is going to react to all this. And it will be a big problem. Oren Baratheon's going to be born the same year as well. He's going to have an entertaining life, a life that will entertain us, us readers. He's not necessarily going to be a happy person or have things go well for him, but he is going to provide us with some entertainment. He's the younger brother of Rhaegar Baratheon, who, of course, will be driving all the Baratheon activity moving forward, starting right around the time Aenys becomes king. So we're still a decade away from that, but I like to point out when these figures are born because their early lives matter too. It's also the year the walls are finished. So we talked about those walls, that walls project. It took 6 years, and this will be a good example of like another mark in King's Landing's growth that would be a milestone in its development that would parse its existence as a difference between those who saw it when it was young or non-existent versus those who were like, wow, it got walls today, That's a change. Like, yep, that's nothing compared to when it wasn't here at all. Not much to say about the year 27, so we'll skip to the year 28. There was a great tournament at Riverrun in the year 28. This was possibly still Lord Edmund Tully. We don't know how long he lived. Remember, this is the guy that became Hand of the King in the year 7 and then quit in the year 9 when his wife died in childbirth. And he's also, of course, the same guy that's Lord Paramount of the Trident. And that might be, he's doing his thing as Lord Paramount, throwing a tournament. And this is a great tournament, not just a small tournament. Great tourney, like one of the like Ashford Meadows or something like that. So if he were not Lord Paramount of the Trident, he might not have had this tournament. And honestly, it probably wasn't Lord Edmund by this time, but it might have been. I mean, Aegon's still alive, so why not Lord Edmund? Either way, the more important thing that happened at this event, I think, is that Maegor increases his reputation. You remember he won that melee before, which was pretty impressive. But this time, he beats 3 Knights of the Kingsguard in a row in the joust. He does eventually lose to somebody. We don't know who. And then goes on to win the melee. So he's won another melee. And that's as impressive as it sounds. Like, we have no reason to think people were losing to him on purpose, like we sort of suspect might have happened for Rhaegar at the tournament at Lannisport. Not that Rhaegar wasn't a good warrior, he was, but we still have evidence to suggest the possibility that they lost him on purpose because of Tywin's plan to marry him to Cersei. But regardless, there's none of that here. Maegor's already married. Maybe they just want to make Maegor look good, but it doesn't seem very likely. 3 different Knights of the Kingsguard agreeing to lose after he's already proven himself a great warrior. This seems legit to me. I have no reason to suspect it's not.
I think there's some reason to suspect it's not, but I don't. I think the default is to accept it. Yeah. But I think there is some reason because we've seen other examples of bouts being thrown, and there might even be some fear of retribution from Aegor if they beat him or something like that. So.
Yeah, that's possible. Now, one of those 3 Knights of the Kingsguard might have been this very same Lord Commander Corlys Velaryon that we've mentioned a few times, that would be brother to the Master of Ships, Lord Ethan, and would be thus a relation, probably the uncle of Alyssa. So, if the division between the family is started by this point, if the lines between the Aenys branch and the Maegor branch have developed, if they're a thing already, well, that would be a reason to not lose to him on purpose for sure. Like, if the Lord Commander is taking the side of his kin, he's definitely not tanking it for Maegor, and he's also not going to be afraid of him, I don't think. I mean, this is the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. He's probably not afraid of anybody. Meanwhile, Maegor is rewarded for this by being knighted. Becomes the youngest knight in the realm, and that's why I mentioned this whole did anyone lose on purpose thing, because the youngest knight in the realm, and he happens to be a prince. It seems like he really did earn it, though. It doesn't come up as nepotism. Maybe a little bit, but not too much. Aegon knighted him personally, too, so that had to be a good feeling for Maegor, and Visenya would have been happy with that. And it was an impressive accomplishment, assuming it was all as legit as it looked.
I will say, it depends on what you mean by earn it, because, as you're going to point out here in a second, I think that Gregor might be a legitimate physical force on the battlefield, but I don't think he earned being a knight. There's more to being a knight than just being a great fighter. So.
I agree, and Westeros tends to forget that. Westeros tends to forget about the non-fighting parts of knighthood, which is why people like Sandor are disgusted with the idea in the first place. And you get it. I understand why Sandor hates it, because that is pretty blatant social, society-wide hypocrisy. Very few people push true knighthood in the way that like a Sansa thinks about it, or even someone that's not attaching naive views to it, which Sansa doesn't anymore, but I meant younger Sansa, of course. So yeah, you're right to bring up Gregor, because Maegor, even the name sounds kind of similar. I mean, this is a man who will be an awful lot like Gregor, especially in that they are both awful a lot. So yeah, a lot awful. Let's move up to the year 29 AC, one more year. Prince Viserys is born. This is the first Viserys that we know of, not Viserys the First, though. He will eventually be squire to Maegor and will be very popular in the realm, though he will never ride a dragon. With those walls finished 3 years prior, they had more options now. They could actually afford, they were like, okay, I'm worried about what's going to happen to King's Landing when I'm not here. Now they don't have to worry about that. They're like, well, we got walls. I can go elsewhere, and we're not so worried about some invasion happening. So they went on the offensive. And by they, I mean the council. Aegon was not part of this. Sir Osmond Stronghand of the King went with Lord Ethan Velaryon, Master of Ships, to the Stepstones to fight Sargoso San, the Pirate King and apparent ancestor of Salador. Presumably, this is something along the lines of what we see in House of the Dragon, or various times when the Stepstones have been a problem for Westeros, which is some sort of pirate king, or the equivalent. It might be a nation like Myr or Lys or Volantis, or a grouping of them, or Tyrosh, holding it and then exacting fines as if there were some sort of pirate king, seizing vessels and taking stuff. Little of one, little of the other. They end up being kind of similar. So that's probably what the Salador or Sargoso San fellow was doing. So they had to go after him. They sent their fleet, went after him, and Maegor went with them. Oh yeah, 17-year-old Maegor. And I got to picture this guy like my headcanon is like Victarion. He's in his armor. He doesn't have an axe, but he's got Dark Sister, right? And whoa, right? Dark Sister in hand. I think I forgot to mention that he was given Dark Sister.
Would Dark Sister look a little puny in his hands, though?
I wondered about that. Yeah, like, was it?
Meant more for Visenya. It's definitely not a big old blade, and he's a big old guy.
Yeah, he is a big old guy. Now, Aemon the Dragon Knight was also a large man, and it didn't, apparently, no one ever said it looked small in his hand. And while you won't rework the blade, you might rework the hilt. You could give it a bigger hilt, and so that might make it more appropriate for Maegor's hand.
Arnold Schwarzenegger's a big guy, but if he's holding M16, your thought isn't what a puny gun, right? Like he could hold a bigger gun, but a sword is a sword. You know, it's still a long sword, even if it's a
That's true.
relatively small long sword. It's still a long sword.
Good point. Yeah. So, he must have killed some pirates. I mean, I can't imagine he wouldn't have been. But what a sight he must have made. You're like some pirate on a ship, and you come to the rails crash together, and men are boarding, and you like that guy hops over the rail. You're like, whoa! I'd rather fight someone else. The Ironborn would approve. Victarion would be like, yeah, now that guy not afraid of drowning. Yeah, no, honestly, I have no idea.
Don't fall overboard in your armor, right?
Yeah. No, I have no idea if Maegor actually wore his armor. I just feel like he just seems like he would. I'm just like guessing and feel like it's a good guess. Now, he would have had some people with him. He would have had some sworn shields. You know, his father and mother would have been like, well, you're not going entirely by yourself here. You know, I know you're with Lord Ethan and Lord Corlys, or Sir Corlys, or not Corlys, but Osmond Strong. But it might not have included Kingsguard. They might have been, there's more princes and princelings for them to guard. And let's be honest, Maegor needs less guarding than just about anyone else in the family. But they still would have had some guys with him, probably. And this is important because this is the first time that under Aegon's reign that they do a martial activity outside of the kingdom, unless you count Dorne, you know. And this wasn't conquest either, so it was a military action in a nearby territory designed to presumably make things better for them, but would also probably make things better for the free cities around as well. It probably was, except for maybe Lys, because Sargasso's son is Lysene, so he might have been backed by elements there, but maybe not. It may have also been Sargasso who attacked Tall Trees Town. He may have been the one that pulled off that daring raid, though I imagine they would have said so if that was the case. Speaking of important navigators and seamen, an important sea woman was born this year, Elissa Farman, of Sun Chaser fame. But of course, her campaign wouldn't be for a couple decades. And the campaign against Sargasso may not have succeeded. Well, it definitely didn't succeed because they went back the following year. And maybe, I don't think the first time was a disaster, given that it was the exact same group of leaders and Maegor again. Or maybe that's just the way it's written, makes it sound like they went twice. Maybe it was just a 2-year campaign. I'm not entirely sure. Either way.
Depends on how you define success.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because we went to a war in Iraq in the 90s, and that was one of the most successful military operations of all time. And then we went back again 10 years later. It doesn't mean we didn't succeed the first time. So.
That's true. And the San family clearly continued, so it didn't wipe them out. Like they clearly kept on going. Maybe he just sailed off into the sunset to enjoy his wealth somewhere else. And again, the connections to Lys here are interesting, not just because they might have been backing him or not, but because Aegon helped the Lyseni at the end of the Century of Blood. Pray recall how he burnt a Volantene fleet that was preparing to invade Lys. So, yeah, that's important to keep in mind. Though rebellions were curbed by the thought of Aegon and Balerion, etc., we didn't have any rebellions inside Westeros during Aegon's reign. There were still, smaller scale problems. Bandit leaders, robber knights, pirate kings, as we just saw, although technically Sargasso wasn't operating in Westeros, he was affecting Westeros. And still, this was another reason to have walls, right? Like a powerful enough bandit leader could have, raided King's Landing. It wouldn't be the same scale. They wouldn't be carrying off slaves to other continents, but it could have done some damage. One example is the so-called Giant of the Trident. We don't know his real name. Must have been a very notable robber knight, given he was remembered by the histories. A robber knight is usually not going to be a problem for the king or the hand or the royal family at all, really. That's usually something for just some house to take care of. House Tully, take care of that. House Harrenhal, take care of that. But clearly they didn't. They couldn't. This guy was such a problem that they needed to go up the chain for bigger help. This is kind of like what was his name? Dagon Greyjoy, who just busted out and started attacking the west coast of Westeros. And Bloodraven's like, Lannisters, Starks, you deal with that. And they tried to, and they couldn't. So he had to send some help, which was embarrassing for everyone involved except the Ironborn.
Yeah.
Who were like, yeah, until they lost, and then they were like, oh, that wasn't worth it, was it? But it was a
Now
great
it's embarrassing.
ride. Yeah. And this guy was pretty clearly operating in the Riverlands, given his name was the Giant of the Trident. But it's hard not to think of Gregor Clegane or the Smiling Knight, who Jaime remembers as the Gregor Clegane of his day, half as big but twice as mad. So, yeah, there's clearly men like this exist from time to time, people who are such a problem that the royal house has to get involved. So, yeah, so clearly the Tullys or the Harrenhals. The Harrenhals? The Coherises. Coheri? I don't even know what to call these people. Could stop him. And the reason I mentioned the Coheri, Gargon the Guest, that awful man who was in charge, he's a Tully grandson. So he's connected to the Lords Paramount of the Trident. But neither the Blackwoods or the Strongs or the Brackens or whoever couldn't stop this guy. So who kills him? Maegor. Right up. Like, like a lot of people wouldn't know the red flags about Maegor. They wouldn't know that he had harmed animals and that he's a brute. Just from his reputation, though, this is a guy that takes care of business, winning tournaments, killing bandits. Like, a lot of people probably liked him. They would maybe change their opinion later. But in the early going, before his reputation was fully known, if all you hear about what a winner he is, you could see why people would, from a distance, might like, yeah, okay, Prince Maegor, cool. Wielding a Valyrian steel blade with a cool name. I mean, yeah, like that's, yeah, reputation building. Whether Maegor actually thought he was keeping the Maegor might have just been like, yeah, I want to fight this guy. I want to fight some dude that thinks he's the Giant of the Trident. This is the kind of man I want to fight. Again, think of Victarion and how Victarion is such a warrior at heart that he's like, I'd give half my teeth to fight Jaime Lannister. What kind of mindset is that? Like, he would give his teeth just to fight some guy. Just because it would be a great fight. Like, that's Maegor. Like, Maegor's like, oh, man, let me at him. I want to fight this guy. Because he sees the reputation. He sees the prestige that he could earn by beating this man. Also, he just likes fighting, as we've seen. It's like he wants to fight someone who's a worthy opponent, someone that he doesn't have to hold back against, because it's not a tournament. Like, actual blood will be drawn. Can you imagine? It's like, in the moment it's happening. The Giant of the Trident, probably easy to spot. In a battle, he's probably got a big standard, and he's a large man. Unless it's one of those like sarcastic nicknames, like he's actually like 5'2" and 100 pounds, and the Giant of the Trident wants your blood. I'm coming for you. Fear me. I'm the Giant of the Trident. And Maegor's like, I wanted to prove myself, and this is, well, come on, man. No, but seriously. It's everything he wanted. As a worthy opponent that he could get more fame and defeat. Yeah, and it also does have to be dealt with. Like if we return to the heart of feudalism, the king is supposed to deal with things like this, and sending his own son to deal with it is a pretty good way of showing that he's taking a personal stake in this issue. So. Moving on to the year 32 AC. Here's a good time as any to note that Lord Orys One Hand is still alive. We haven't heard from him in a while. But the small chance that he had to inherit the throne is all but gone now, right? There was a time before any princes had been born, and, had Aegon died, he might have become king. But, that's long gone, and he has his own large family developing down to Storm's End. So we'll come back to them later. Just wanted to check in real quick there. This is the year 32 AC that Rhaena is presented with Dreamfire and bonded with her pretty quickly. She is 9 years old at this time. Now, this is really interesting. This is yet another example of someone who starts off a little shy, starts off a little weak, and then when they bond with their dragon, their confidence shoots up. In some cases, it's more than just their confidence, like Aenys himself. It was like, it almost seemed like some of his physical strength was derived from his bond with Quicksilver. So now we see the same thing with Rhaena. And again, we have an amazing parallel from A Song of Ice and Fire. Dany. Remember, bring me my egg, I want to, and it brings her strength. She feels stronger when she's holding the egg. She feels the warmth within it, which no one else feels. So there's definitely some supernatural element potential here. Like, and if Rhaena felt that, if she felt that bond grow and she recognized it, that would explain her mothering instinct. That would explain why she is the first one to put eggs in the cradles of her younger siblings. Because she's like, well, why wait till they're older? She had that instinct, kind of like Dany did, from beyond. Something intuitive within her DNA told her to do that. And with Dany, that is what it feels like. She's having these dreams of just, mother of dragons, go into the fire, hatch the eggs, all this stuff. It's like voices from the ancient past or voices from her own DNA or both. Rhaena seems to have had that too. And I think that's really neat. And it deserves a further look at another time, but we're trying to cover a lot in one episode today. Any take on that, Sean? Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, it's the type of thing I wonder if that was lost in the doom somehow. If that was something that surely someone must have been aware of that, but in the turmoil and transition and everything, it was lost.
Some of it just comes off like regular confidence, like, oh, I'm a kid, I'm a little shy, but look what I can do. I'm proud of myself. I've taken on this big challenge. I'm a confident dragon rider now. Some of that's just like human nature, I think. But it doesn't, like when you throw Dany in there and the eggs, and it's like
there does seem to be like a mystical element, and I wonder too, in this sort of male-dominated scenario, if it might have been lost, something that the mothers realized we need to put these eggs in the cradles, but if the dads didn't care, they didn't know or care that was happening, and so it didn't get brought with them. That tradition or knowledge didn't get brought with them to Dragonstone.
So she was too old to have done that for her own future husband, Aegon. So she didn't start doing that with him because she was only 3 when he was born. She didn't have the idea till later. And maybe it's the idea that she gains here, bonding with Dreamfire. I think the egg dropping starts right after this, in fact. And interestingly too, though, Aegon doesn't have a dragon. He also didn't take one. He will have one later. But was he waiting kind of like Maegor was? Was he like, I'll also wait for a big one? It's definitely an interesting concept here. So we also have to ask the question, did they know they'd be betrothed to each other? Did they wonder about it? I think yes. Rhaena would be 9 and Aegon would be 6 at this time. And the Faith are going to hate it. And a lot of people are going to predictably guess that the Faith would hate it. And once again, I wonder if Aegon had anything to weigh in on here. Did King Aegon just expect this? Did he expect they can deal with this problem themselves? Gildane will suggest in Fire and Blood much later that will suggest here that they knew they were going to marry from very early on. Now, he wasn't there, but I have no reason to doubt him. I don't assume he just made that up. So it seems to be that was the vibe at court at the time, that, everybody expected Rhaena and Aegon to marry. And of course, that makes sense given Targaryen Valyrian marriage practices. But the question is, what did they expect in terms of consequences, if any? Were they just blind to it? Because they might have been. They might have been that arrogant, that detached, that they just thought the Faith would be fine with it or just accept it. Even though they knew the Faith wouldn't like it, they'd be like, well, they can handle it. They'll have to learn to live with it, the Faith. It's like, that's not a good attitude to take towards an organization with that much military power and that much influence. So, speaking of sowing bad seeds, the problem continues between Aenys and Maegor. It's not just the future problems between Aenys and the Faith, and Maegor and the Faith, by the way, who will have a much bigger problem with them if we're being honest. As concerned as Aegon with that piece, he didn't seem to perceive or show this kind of concern in the differences with his sons. And as we pointed out earlier, they weren't raised together. So they didn't really have a lot of time to bond. And let's check in with that, because here at the year 32, Aenys is 25 and Maegor is 20. A lot longer, a lot farther down the line here. Quote,
"The half-brothers were never close. Prince Aenys was the heir apparent, and King Aegon kept him close by his side. As the king moved about the realm from castle to castle, so did the prince. Prince Maegor remained with his mother, sitting by her side when she held court."
Yep. There we go. Sitting by her side when we held court. Yeah, so that's familiar. It's kind of restating what we already knew. It's the same deal. It's also, as we've said throughout this episode, it's kind of human. There's maybe some reasons that Aegon might have expected to go better. But yeah, having rose-colored glasses on where your own children are concerned is super normal. Let's be honest. Lots of people see their own children without the flaws, or with the flaws, made smaller. And that's part of parenting. You're supposed to love your children despite their flaws. So I don't think that's a bad thing. But it definitely can cause problems in ruling families, which is why we shouldn't have ruling families. That's one of many reasons why we shouldn't have that. And Tywin had the blindness about his own children and their incest, and what problems that might cause, and whether it's even happening or not. At least here they know it's happening. They just are blind to the social problems that it's going to cause later. And again,
Cersei and Robert were blind to Joffrey's problems.
Oh,
or
yeah.
if not completely blind to it, not addressing it, not accounting for it. So.
Yeah, and Robert was blind to just a lot of other things about his children, like them not being his. And again, we come back to TV Viserys, and book Viserys too, although TV Viserys is maybe... We get more personal with TV Viserys, so I think he makes a better example for... Especially because it does reflect what we know about the books. With him just get along. Just stop fighting. That's not going to work. Just telling them to stop fighting isn't going to... You realize what's at stake here? The throne. Just arguing with them and telling them to stop will not work. And it's kind of crazy that you think it will. But it's also very human.
It was at least a start, though, right? Because
he
was pretty much ignoring it until that point. So, and we had a moment of hope at that point, too, that maybe it would. Maybe that appeal, maybe that personal appeal from a...
It was just the music that made us
like
feel
10 minutes or something, but yeah.
Yeah, and again, I repeat that Aegon made it such a point to have everybody together so they would grow up together and learn together and grow together, but he didn't do that with his sons. Yeah. And another difference here is that in Viserys' case, these are adult children. With Aegon, they're a step younger here, because Aegon didn't have kids till he was later. Like, Viserys started having kids when he was young. Aegon didn't. And Aegon and Viserys can't use the excuse of being on the road a lot and having to rule the realm. He wasn't exactly doing that instead. He was doing neither. Whereas Aegon actually was at least trying to rule and had a more difficult time of ruling,
His time was understandably split.
Yeah.
If not, maybe not excusably split, but at least understandably split. So.
Yeah. So honestly, it seems like Aegon just didn't have a very active role in his family's life at all, except for his firstborn son, who he took on progresses and taught him how to rule. And although that didn't go very well, did it? He maybe didn't teach him very well, because Aenys was not a good king. And and maybe he should have been a bigger part of Maegor's life. Maybe Maegor was harmed by that, by not having his dad around. Maybe he took it personally. May have been the case of expedience. The reason Maegor was left aside may have been it's the equivalent of having a Stark in Winterfell. There must always be a Stark in Winterfell. There must always be a Targaryen in Dragonstone. We can't have both heirs on the road. That would be an unnecessary risk. What if the whole family is poisoned? What if, yeah. But them growing apart is clearly a big risk too. One that Aegon has obviously understood already. So it's like he either thought this risk was bigger than the other, or he just kind of, we're back to our rose-colored glasses argument. This is definitely not a case of opposites attract. It's not like, I'm the protective bigger brother who has to, help his younger brother. Doesn't really seem like Maegor looked at Aenys that way. Especially because Visenya didn't seem to look at Aenys that way, and he may have gotten that from his mom. And maybe Aegon was just getting softer in his older age. Not soft, but softer, because he was pretty heavy, pretty hard when he was younger. He was extremely happy at being a grandfather. Might have been pretty happy with what he had accomplished in his life, and might have thought things were going well. The Targaryen family was in kind of a fragile state, right? Like, it didn't have a lot of there weren't heirs. There weren't a lot of branches of the family. There weren't any other branches of the family. And like I said, there hadn't been a new dragon rider in such a long time. And all of a sudden there's dragon riders happening every other year. So as far as the health of House Targaryen, it probably looked really good given where it had been. Using that same dichotomy of before King's Landing, there was nothing here. Y'all don't know what it was like 25 years ago. Same thing applies here. We're just pointing at a different target. We're just highlighting a different thing that was much changed over those years. The distinct change in House Targaryen and its outlook, its power. It's just its quantity. The number of dragon. Now, as we know, the quantity is going to become a problem later. But there weren't too many of them at this point, I think. Maybe there were. I don't know how many dragons is too many dragons, but
One.
okay, all right.
One
Well, in
is
that
too
case,
many.
there are already way. Yeah, that's a fair point. Yes. And if we think about how old he is, and you can see, he's in the year 32, he was 57 or 58 years old. So he's getting up there. He had a hard life living on the road. This is a man who lived a soldier's life, even though he was the king and had it more comfortable than a lot of soldiers would have been. Still, hard living. Yes, feasting and luxuries, but also lots of travel. And he wasn't always traveling in comfort. He was traveling with lots of people, but it's still, living on the road isn't easy, even when you're rich. Even when you get to sleep in whatever lord's bed you're staying in whenever you're there. Still. So
lots of burden and responsibility and tragedy that he's faced through
stress,
his life too.
Yeah. So let me throw a little angle. Something I was considering. This is very conspiratorial. We always want to bring it back to the prophecy. The prophecy that Aegon had in his dream. And that's part of the stress that he would have, is making sure the realm doesn't get overwhelmed by winter on his watch or on his descendants' watch. I would think that would stress you out a bit, having dreams like that. Might make your silver hair turn gray a little sooner. How do you even tell, though? How do you tell how can you tell when Targaryens are getting older? It's like, their eyes are just as purple as they used to be. But consider the possibility. This is very conspiratorial, but the idea that the dreams were sent to him, we know that's a thing because of glass candles, that some power convinced him that this was necessary to unite Westeros in order to take it from the Targaryens 300 years later, which is, that's why it's a crazy conspiratorial idea. But if we look at the TV show's ending with Bran on the Iron Throne, it's like, well, the old gods are the ones who can have the power to send dreams in this realm. If the old gods, this continuum of tree wizards, sent this dream to Aegon, just like they sent dreams to Bran, then this is their goal enacted. They conned Aegon into conquering the Seven Kingdoms and then stole it from his descendants 300 years later. Again, pretty wild idea, but I think it's fun. Anyway, this whole stuff with Aenys getting all the attention and all the business of being firstborn, all this stuff, could cause the jealousy and family friction to get worse. And it would be exacerbated by Maegor's failure to have children and his confidence that he was going to. He thought he was going to have kids, and then he didn't, so that made him feel bad, probably. And then that would cause him to drop in the line of succession as each successive child is born, because we had baby Aegon born, then we had Viserys born, and we're about to have some more. So he's falling farther and farther behind the line of succession and not having children of his own. So that's a lot of frustration. Maybe his pride, his manliness is touched on, because again, Westeros men having children is a manly thing. He's not doing it. Now, again, we don't know if Rhaena bumped him down in the line of succession, but Aegon and Viserys, and in a minute, Jaehaerys definitely did. And of course, Jaehaerys is the one who's going to take the throne from him eventually anyway, although with a lot of help. So not only were these princes jumping him in the line of succession, two of them had dragons. So they're also just like, in some ways, they're just more Targaryen than him. And yeah.
So a thought I had here that, kind of a theme we've been running is if he had been prepared to be Hand, if that had been like a mission on Aegon's plate to prep Maegor to be Hand. So instead of him being so focused on being able to beat people up, he was focused on learning how to rule, right? If he had at least maybe split time with Aenys on these royal progresses, if he had spent more time with his dad, it might have kept him from getting so jealous and bitter in the first place, so militant and violent in the first place. It would have given him a more worldly perspective and a greater sense of responsibility. There might have been a greater obligation on Aegon or the advisors around to address the red flags that Maegor had. And he wouldn't be slipping farther out of power, too, if he was secure in a number 2-ish spot as Hand of the King. All these new princes being born wouldn't have felt like a threat to him. So maybe that's a lot to expect him to have been prepped for Hand of the King, but I think, and maybe he's just going to be crazy anyway. But I wonder if he had been cultivated for that position all along, if it would have resolved a lot of the issues that came out of this whole scenario.
And you might, and it's a very good question, because he is going to be Hand of the King. Aenys will make him Hand of the King, but that doesn't mean he was prepared for it.
He wasn't
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
But doesn't mean he's prepared to do anything more than just like deal with the crown's enemies. He seems good at that. He's very good at that.
It's going to be kind of like I was saying before, this annoying thing he's stuck doing back home while his brother has all the fun with his dad.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
But if he thought of it as this responsible way to impress his father to maintain peace in the realm, peace and prosperity, right? Instead of, I'll impress my father by beating people up.
Yeah, this is another big difference between, like, if we were trying to compare Aenys and Maegor to Daemon and Viserys, this is something they don't have in common, because Daemon and Viserys were close. That's part of where a lot of the conflict between them comes, is Daemon feels slighted by some of his brother's choices, whereas Aenys and Maegor just weren't close. So, like, you're slighting me because we're brothers, but not because we have a personal relationship. And he didn't slight him, he named him Hand. So, in the year 33 AC comes the death of Vicon Greyjoy, Lord Vicon Greyjoy, and the ascent of Lord Goran. Not a big change, because Goran learned the lessons of his father. His father was there when Balerion came and defeated them and put down the rebellion that was happening between Lodos and all that other business. And the Greyjoys were appointed to rule, and he's like, yeah, we want to hold on to this. Don't go against the dragons. Hey, son, don't go against the dragons. And we know that the Royal Progresses took 3 trips to the Iron Islands, so they would have been reminded of what they're up against, with Balerion and Aegon coming there personally. So Goran would have, if Goran wasn't there to witness Balerion in action during that short period of time when the Iron Islands was put to rights or put to order, he would have seen Balerion at least just chilling in one of those future visits and would have been wowed by the sheer size of the animal. This is also the year of the final progress Aegon takes, which was, as we talked about last time, his first trip to Winterfell. So it may have included other stops in the north, because he had been to the north before and might have wanted to go other places. But yeah, it's his first trip to Winterfell. Now, we talked a bit about that last time, about how it may have related to a change in leadership and all this stuff. But one thing that we didn't mention also relates to the prophecy, which is it's another chance for Aegon and whoever the Stark in Winterfell is at the time, whether it's Torrhen or Brandon the Boisterous or Rickard Stark, one of those 3 most likely, they could discuss the prophecy in private. Perhaps not even with maesters around. But that also is worth bringing up. Aegon, did he ever discuss the prophecies with his maesters? I'm guessing no, but maybe it's a soft no, because none of them wrote about it.
Yeah, I think
so. That's a problem.
There would have had to be a campaign to like remove it from the histories if it existed. I don't think the maesters would have just chosen to not mention it once. I think it's a good point. There's no way.
But he did make a big deal about having a lot of maesters around him, like 6.
Maybe one of the maesters. Yeah. I can imagine him confiding in one, especially given that he had so many. That might have been part of why they might have each had different sort of roles, like someone who's more knowledgeable about the histories of each of the kingdoms. Right. One's more knowledgeable about medicine.
One of the ones with the Valyrian steel link would be a candidate for magic discussions.
Yeah,
he might have instructed him not to repeat any or write down anything of what they discussed. That would remove the need for it to be removed after the fact. It would never written down in the first place, which I think that's possible. Yeah, that's possible. It is possible anyway. Now recall Cersei. Again, we have a Song of Ice and Fire example, asking Qyburn about the supernatural, about prophecy specifically. Like, she's concerned about the prophecy of Maggie the Frog, and Aemon. Maester Aemon has thoughts on the supernatural, and he probably corresponded with Rhaegar. Marwyn has thoughts on the prophecy, which is, prophecy is like having your, what is it, like having your dick bitten or whatever? That's what he says. Melisandre says it's a sword without a hilt. Yeah, there's lots of colorful euphemisms for prophecy in this series and elsewhere. And again, I've asked this question before, but I feel like even Rhaenys and Visenya, did he not tell? I think he might have had to tell them, but maybe not. He had to tell Aenys, though. He had to pass it on. That's one person that had to know. And if he tells Aenys, who knows when, though? When did he tell him? On one of those Royal Progresses? When he turned 16? When he first rode a dragon? This would be decent guesses, I suppose, but I don't know. There's also...
Any chance he told Maegor?
I would think no, because the throne wasn't going to pass to Maegor, especially like after Aenys starts having kids and all that. It looks like Maegor's even farther behind. Yeah, it's possible. It is possible, but I'm guessing no.
Because I wonder if it could explain why Maegor was so determined to be a good warrior. Maybe he thought he had to fulfill this prophecy.
Interesting.
Maybe part of why he was cruel, like maybe he thought the world doesn't matter anyway. Like I haven't had a son, so the prophecy can't fulfill, so nothing matters anyway. I wonder,
Wow. Dark, but possible. And with the growing family and important Targaryens in multiple locations, we'd see more of the Kingsguard being divided and split in different areas, which might be where you start to see a little more, little personal relationships, maybe bias within the Kingsguard. Some Kingsguard might favor certain Targaryens more than others because of who they spend more time with. Things like that might start to happen. And for example, again, we come back to Lord Commander Corlys. Did Visenya and Maegor not trust him as much? Maybe because he's connected to Alyssa and the others, or was his loyalty well established? Maybe he was not. Again, I have to repeat that he may not be alive at this point. We don't know when he died. But either way, there would be, what house is this Kingsguard from, and is that maybe an issue or not? The year 34, the year Jaehaerys was born. This is when Rhaena definitely did the egg cradle thing, and probably the first time. And she did it for Jaehaerys, and that egg did indeed become Vermithor, the dragon he bonded with, and it was a big dragon, the Bronze Fury. I am reticent to say this early bonding helped the dragon grow larger, but given how little we know about how dragons work and given their magical things, it's possible. It's very possible. It's worth adding on to the long list of theories about dragons and how they work and grow. Meanwhile, Sir Osmond Strong, Hand of the King, Wall Builder for King's Landing, and Sargoso San Fighter, died and was replaced by Lord Alan Stokeworth, a man who seems brave and likely to be very competent. Now, Alan Stokeworth is going to hold the job for a little while, but if we refer back to the career of Sir Osmond, there's gaps in the Hand's record. Like there's some periods where we don't know who the Hand was. Not a lot, though. Most of the Hands we know. It's mostly during the reign of Aegon III and Aegon V where we have these large gaps. But very few ever will hold the office longer than Sir Osmond, who held it for 17 years. So the third ever Hand of the King will be the longest running for quite a while until Barth comes along. Actually, not that far later, and sets the all-time record. Bloodraven, 26 plus years. Tywin, 19, and then again for about 2, because he had 2 separate terms. And then Prince Viserys, again, not to be confused with this current Prince Viserys. This is the Prince Viserys who became King Viserys II. He's going to rule as Hand of the King for about 18 years. So a little longer than Osmond.
A strong hand can hold on for a long time.
Very good. The year 35 is when we get more homemaking, more making the house a home. Aegon gives the order to destroy the Aegon fort and build something more fitting. Now, again, it was wooden. You get a wooden castle for the king of the Iron Throne and a guy with dragons. It's just not fitting. I mean, your dragon can destroy your castle with a sneeze. I mean, yeah, it's time to rebuild, right? Alan Stokeworth's first major task was to do this, was to rebuild what became the Red Keep. I don't even know if they had a name for it at first, but that name seems to have come after they were building it and realized, hey, this thing is red. Look at that. Let's call it the Red Keep. It really seems like qualification to be a Hand of the King in this era was to have some skill in overseeing building projects, because the last one did the wall building project for 6 years. This Red Keep building project's going to take more than a decade. Oh, yeah. But it wasn't just his job. It was also Visenya's. He sent Visenya to King's Landing to help oversee the castle. She wasn't needed for the wall building project, but this is a little more about like where they're going to be living, and so it's a little more personal. Like it's like have your wife take charge of the interior design kind of situation or something. On the other hand, he also swapped places with her again. He was living in King's Landing. She was at Dragonstone. He ordered her to come to build the Red Keep, and he went to Dragonstone. So it's like he just keeps avoiding her, or is that just
Yeah.
more about having the rulers in different places. But you could see why those rumors about him not wanting to be around her would persist.
I think so. I really, really think he was not fond of her. I don't think he hated her or anything like that. I don't think anything so extreme. But I don't think he was like raring to spend his time with her at all.
Especially if he was getting softer and she was still just as hardcore as ever, and she was getting harder. Yeah.
I mean,
if he was pressing him about this and that, or about these marriages, or marry Maegor to your granddaughter, and she's just like, I'm so sick of this. Or it might not have been political at all. It might have been like, it could be what you said. She just finds her grating.
Yeah, or it could have been what you said. He just like thought it was best to not keep all their eggs in one nest or whatever, and just keep Visenya separate from him. Yeah, he could have thought that. I don't know. It's true. I mean, it could be both of those things. I mean, he could say it was that, but in his head, he's like, I'm so glad I have an excuse to not see Visenya.
And here we see another impact of their parenting. When, as brutal and psycho as Maegor is, he had a lot of energy for building projects. And maybe he got this from his mother, watching her operate, watching her take over the building of the Red Keep, which he would later take a big hand in. After all, Maegor's holdfast is the final refuge within the Red Keep, and it's named after him for a reason. He designed it. He ordered it put in there. Of course, this is also the guy that had all the builders killed. But that's Maegor for you. He's a brutal guy, but he's not uninteresting. He definitely drives the story in some fun ways. And so I think that's an interesting kind of dot connection there. His interest in building projects and how his mother had a lot of responsibility in terms of building the house for the Targaryens would live in. The Red Keep, the one they'd live in forever. And it also shows the paranoia, though, and the mistrust of their own people. We talked about how, they built walls to keep out outsiders. The Red Keep is just as much keeping out their own people. It's defense against the population rising up against them, which it will absolutely prove valuable in that regard multiple times in its history. It will keep out angry, rioting commoners, and as well as some legitimate, invading armies. So, and this is another thing I wonder about as far as when Aegon went to Dragonstone and sent Visenya to court. It says he took the small council with him. So, what about Maegor? Did he also? I assume he went to court to stay with his mom, especially because this dot connecting with the building projects and the Red Keep and all that. But it's possible he stayed on Dragonstone and was, for a short time, had a little bit more of an active role at court and council. But I'm guessing he went to with his mom. What do you think, Sean? Any guesses on that or takes on that?
Yeah, it's another scenario where I wonder how much conflict there would have been between him and the hand who was charged with building this. If they worked together well, how involved was the council, or if they were at odds with each other. I wonder how much, if Maegor had been given more building projects, if it would have kept him busy enough for and not do some of the other stuff he did.
That's something to put his energy into that isn't violent.
Do you think Maegor also
shouldn't be violent, but he still ended up?
He managed to find a way to make it violent. Yeah.
Do you think Maegor also had a bedroom filled with models? Yeah.
That's a funny thing. Actually, Viserys, the dragon you had the most in common with was Maegor. Like, wait, what? Yeah, you guys both were really into models. Yeah, this was Maegor's before it was yours. Yeah.
That is an interesting thought. I wonder.
Yeah. Imagine Visenya giving Maegor some little model Valyria when he's a boy, and then him growing into a bigger version of that later, and then it just gets stick into a dusky closet later until Viserys finds whoa, look at this! It's like Legos, man. Yeah, I love it.
I'm imagining him having all sorts of proposed Red Keep designs. What I mean? All sorts of different architectural little
secret tunnels,
structures, trying to figure out which one is gonna actually get built.
Yeah, isn't that it's fascinating to think about that the guy who had all those secret tunnels made is Maegor. So the year 36. This is basically the last year we'll cover. We'll flirt with the following year briefly in our outro, but 36 AC, Alysanne is born. So Viserys' future, Jaehaerys's future wife. Dang it. Yep,
You'll
it
get
is.
there.
It is getting near the end of the episode. As I just can't
Say
talk
that sentence
anymore.
again.
What's that?
Just say that sentence.
I'll just say that again. Yes. So, Alysanne is born, future wife to Jaehaerys. Rhaena places an egg in her cradle as well, because she's that mothering older sibling that she is. And that dragon egg hatches and becomes Silverwing. So again, it's a success story. I wonder if Vermithor had already hatched by this time. Probably. It had only been a couple years, but that's all it takes, I think. So yeah, probably. So at this time, Rhaena is now 13. Aegon's 10. Aenys and Alyssa are 29. Maegor's 24. Aegon's 62. Visenya 64. A lot of others are still out there too. Daria Martell is still alive as far as we know. Gargon the Guest. Lord Orys One Hand also still alive. Ethan Velaryon still alive. Possibly Lord Commander Corlys Velaryon. We don't know about him. That's still, again, that's Ethan's brother. And it's a pretty important year, although in terms of milestones, though I don't know that we have a ton to say about it. This is continuing forward, barreling towards the problems of the beginning of Aenys' reign and setting up a lot of groundwork for the conflict between Maegor and Aenys' descendants later, as well as Maegor and the Faith and the Dance of the Dragons. You could absolutely trace some of the Dance of the Dragons groundwork to this stuff here.
Yeah, I'm super curious about like when Rhaena became like a woman, when she like got her first period, right?
Yeah.
She's 13 right here, so it's probably like right around this time. 1 and 2, how much interaction Maegor and Rhaena had. 'Cause he's like 24, there's like 13. I just like wonder if they like kept them apart or if they ever interact. Yeah, I'm just a little bit idly curious about that.
Yeah, and I wonder, I forgot to mention in the year 35 was Rhaena's first flight on Dreamfire. She bonded with Dreamfire when she was 9, but she didn't fly on him until she was 12. So 3 more years, and part of that is Dreamfire being too small to ride. That's not just her development, it's the dragon as well, because Dreamfire was a hatchling when she was presented with her the first time. So yeah, you'd see that's an interesting like brother-sister dynamic. Rhaena's out there flying her dragon, and meanwhile Aegon doesn't have one yet. And again, that's why we asked the question of, was he waiting? Was it a similar thing? If Maegor's waiting for a dragon, you should wait for one too, for the same reason. If he wants to claim Balerion, maybe you should wait to claim Balerion because you have arguably a better claim to Balerion. That might have been a thing that came to head. As it turned out, Maegor just got the initiative and claimed Balerion, and that was that. But they may have been thinking that Aegon would have that chance. And I don't know who they is. Maybe Aegon himself, maybe Aenys, maybe Alyssa, maybe all of them. Maybe Aegon, the King Aegon himself as well, was expecting this Aegon to get Balerion. But he obviously didn't like write that down or decree it, because that certainly isn't given to us as in the sources, and it seems like it would have been if that had happened. So the next year is when Aegon dies. And that's when things are going to really blow up, and we're going to leave the story here. But leaving it here gives us quite a picture of House Targaryen. We've got a lot of kids now, a lot of grandchildren. You got 5 grandchildren from the union of Alyssa and Aenys, and you still have Maegor and all these. The family is double digits now, depending on who you count, but I think even a tight counting is a large number of people. And if you count the dragons that have been born in this era, we have unnamed dragons in this era that we don't even know about. We tried to guess who those 6 hatchlings were that were offered to Maegor, and we only had one idea: as a cannibal, which might mean the cannibal ate the other 5. that would explain it somewhat.
Yeah, we'll give it its name real quick. If they had one dragon, they had 6 dragons, and one dragon ate the other 5. We're like, you're the cannibal.
Yeah, like dang, that's a thing that can happen. Yikes! Like, woof. That's like something out of, I don't know, you hear that in like some of the Star Wars races have things like that. Some of these weird aliens that exist in Star Wars, like like I think not Greedo's race, but the one the snake race, the one that they have arms that can grow back. I'm pretty sure. No, it's that Bosk. Yeah, the brown skinned reptile. He killed all his siblings in the nest.
Oh, the Trandoshans.
Yeah, Trandoshans do that. Yeah, they're brutal from the beginning. Yeah, so dragons and
what is
Trandoshans
worse-
have some things in common.
That is a real thing in just normal nature also.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, and mamas do that too. Like you'll see like a mom bird or squirrel. It's like, I can't raise all 5 of you. One of you's got to go. I can only raise 4 of you. It's brutal, but yeah, nature is metal, as they say.
It makes me think of what's that Futurama quote about nature? Can you think of it?
No.
It's where they say nature is for in the end, nature is horrific and teaches us nothing. That's it. In the end, nature is horrific and teaches us nothing.
Yep. Supernature. It's true that in that case as well. So yeah. All right. So yeah, it will not be a peaceful transition of power. It's almost like many people were just waiting for Aegon to die or for Aenys to take over, one or the other. It's the same. Take chicken or the egg, dragon or the egg. You take your pick. The realm went from someone everyone was afraid of because he had proved repeatedly that you should be afraid of him to someone that almost no one was afraid of, even though he had a dragon and a nasty, dangerous brother. They apparently just kind of ignored that part. But to be fair, Maegor was not the rider of Balerion just yet, so it was still a bad idea. But you can see why it was a better idea to try it against Aenys than against Aegon. So we have a lot to say about that, but we won't be coming back with that next time. We're going to pivot away from Fire and Blood briefly as we are establishing a pattern. We'll do, 5, 6, 7, 8 Fire and Blood episodes at a time, pivot away, do other stuff, and then come back to it. And I imagine we'll be able to pivot back to it probably one more time before House of the Dragon season. But of course, we'll return to it when the time is appropriate, and we will let you know. So next week, I'm going to leave it a little bit of a surprise for now. Because we usually tell you, but it's fun to have the occasional surprise. So this is a good time for that. But I won't leave you in the dark on the trivia question, because that would be very mean of me. Which of Prince Aegon's grandchildren, did not ever ride a dragon? That would be Prince Viserys, the middle child. Never rode a dragon that we know of. He did become Maegor's squire, and that didn't go very well for him.
I will say we got a number of people who said Viserys and some people who questioned whether Vaela would count.
That's a fair point. Vaela died in the cradle.
Yeah, like,
I don't usually count that.
She lived longer enough. Anyways, that was the debate going on in the chat.
It's a good point. If I were to ever ask that question again, out of all the children
Adults.
who lived to
be dragon riding age.
Yeah, to be old enough to ride a dragon, because certainly Vaela was not old enough to ride a dragon. So yeah, we'll have to word that exception properly. But yes, it's a fair point when we're doing trivia. Trivial answers definitely are fair game. So good call on those of you who mentioned Vaela.
Wait, what do we have to say? Vaea?
Vaea, yes, Vaea.
Chloe of Girls Gone Canon and got us started on. She says just Daela as like paella. And now whenever I see those names, I'm like Vaea.
Yeah.
Vaea. I just have to hear it.
It's the Spanish or Portuguese Targaryens. Yes. All right. So we mentioned some episodes that relate to this one. Of course, we mentioned young Tywin, so the Reigns of Castamere would be a good one. Obviously, Under the Dragon's High Tower, both the parts 1 and 2. We talked about the changes at the Iron Island, so our Patreon episode on the Red Kraken would be fun. We talked about Dorne a bit, so maybe Nymeria is your bag. And we talked a bit about Dark Sister, so you can check out our episode on Dark Sister. Those are my suggestions for this time, but there's so many others you can find by browsing our back catalog. It is large, if I do say so myself. Yes, I do. Sean, you have some shout-outs you wish to give to some of our patrons. Let's hear them.
As always, I include a few classic veterans and new recruits. We've got Lady Erin of House Snowblood, Mother of Maniacs. A couple straightforward names here. Jake V and the Paladin.
Ooh, the Paladin. Nice.
There's some newer ones. Sir Dumpsteer of House Raccoon. Sigil is a fat black and silver raccoon on gray field. Words, gimme.
That is the right way to spell dumpsteer. It's spelled Dumpstyr, like the Magnar steer, the Magnar.
Yeah, I
Finn.
love that.
Dumpsteer.
That is Dom of
awesome.
Folkwise over on Twitch.
Hey, yeah, give Folkwise a follow.
Notable raccoon lover.
Yes, absolutely.
A couple more here. Adler Snow,
Adler.
Bastard of Bear. Oh, I said that wrong. Sorry. Adler Snow, Bastard of Bear Island, known as the Northern Fury, as fierce as she is loyal. And Wisdom Mendax, Bastard of Starfall.
Yeah, cool. Yes, that's appropriate. Thanks as well to Nina for all the great notes. Lots of great points today. Lots of great discussion topics. Lots of good rabbit holes for us to dive into. Again, her blog is Good Queen Alley with 1L.tumblr.com. You know, I never point out that Tumblr is without an E, but I imagine you knew that. If you know anything about Tumblr, it's like, I don't know, Grindr. That it's not like Grindr. I mean, the spelling is like it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was like, Tumblr, just like Grindr. Yeah,
but not at all.
Just like
not just
Google
like.
knows enough to help you out if you didn't know.
Yes. You don't need to Google Grindr if you don't know what that's about, though. Joey, Jesse, Bran, and Michael Klarfeld, thanks to you all for your excellent additions to our show in the form of maps, intro, outro, and music
Can I
in
tell
all
you,
its forms.
every time you say that group of names, I think of Daria.
Daria
Yeah,
is
have
in
you ever heard
the
of that?
cartoon?
Yeah, the cartoon Daria, because there's Joey, Jeffy, and Jamie, the three boys that like Quinn Morgendorfer like has always following her around, but like the three J's they're known by. So as you go Joey, Jesse, and I'm like, Jeffy?
Jeffy?
Oh yeah, burning Daria lovers.
Jeffy is definitely a name of someone very young, I think. An adult named Jeffy. I've never heard of such a thing.
Yeah, it's a teen boy. They're all
Yeah.
teen boys, and they're all meant to be a little bit emasculated by, I think, being Joey, Jesse, and Jamie and Jeffy, whatever. Yeah.
Well, on behalf of my fellow co-hosts and all of our many cats, who I guess we didn't get any appearances from them today, but next time, perhaps.
Y'all gotta come in and ask.
Yeah, you gotta ask for cat appearances. We rarely don't come through when you ask, but y'all don't always ask. But until next time, Valar, reread us.